Beneath centuries of gold leaf and silent stone, a world hides in plain sight. Deep in the heart of Rome stands a sovereign city unlike any other, a place where faith meets power, and time seems to hold its breath. The Vatican, known to millions as the spiritual center of Catholicism. But behind the marble facades and sacred rituals lies another story, one that the public rarely sees. What secrets are buried beneath St. Peter's Basilica? Why are entire archives locked away from the world, accessible only to a chosen few? And what are we to make of the strange manuscripts, unexplained artifacts, and whispered sightings of things that defy all earthly logic? This is a place where miracles are proclaimed, and yet some questions are never answered. From cryptic prophecies to vanished documents, from shadowy councils to relics that science cannot explain, each layer we peel back reveals a deeper enigma, more haunting than the last. So sit back, clear your mind, and step into a realm where history, mystery, and faith collide. Let's begin our descent into the most baffling Vatican mysteries that remain unsolved to this day. High in the cool, quiet foothills of the Himalayas, where mist clings to ancient cedar forests and the air carries the scent of incense and pine, lies a town with an unusual story. Nestled in northern Kashmir, Srinagar is known for its lakes and wooden houseboats. But on a quiet hillside, beyond the everyday bustle, there stands a modest stone structure, weather-worn and humble. It is called the Rosa Bal Shrine. To locals, it is simply the resting place of a Sufi saint named Uz Asaf. Yet to others, this unassuming tomb holds something far more controversial, perhaps even heretical: the claim that it is the final resting place of Jesus of Nazareth. Could it be true? Could Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, have once walked the soil of India and lived out his final days not in crucified martyrdom, but in quiet contemplation among the mystics of the East? Mainstream historical accounts of Jesus' life are notably silent about a specific period, the so-called lost years. The canonical Gospels leap from a single event in Jesus' childhood, his visit to the temple at age 12, straight into the beginnings of his public ministry nearly 2 decades later, around age 30. What happened during those missing years? Why would the most documented religious figure in Western history vanish from the record during his formative youth and early adulthood? This silence has long puzzled scholars, theologians, and seekers alike. Most assume Jesus remained in Galilee, living a life of quiet labor, perhaps studying Jewish law or working as a carpenter. But others propose something more daring: that he left Judea altogether, that he traveled east, possibly following the ancient trade routes that wove through Persia and into India, lands where spiritual traditions stretched back thousands of years. In 1894, a Russian explorer named Nicholas Notovich published a controversial book titled The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. In it, he claimed to have discovered ancient scrolls in a Buddhist monastery in Hemis, Ladakh, deep in the Indian Himalayas. These scrolls, according to Notovich, described a young man named Isa who came from the West, studied the Vedas and Buddhist teachings, challenged caste divisions, and eventually returned to his homeland. Notovich identified Isa as Jesus. The academic world met his claims with harsh skepticism. Many dismissed the book as a fabrication. Several investigators traveled to the Hemis monastery and found no trace of the alleged manuscripts. Still, others insist Notovich's story holds some truth, or at least points toward a larger mystery. Could local oral traditions preserve fragments of a forgotten journey? In Ladakh and Kashmir, whispers persist of a holy man from the West who taught compassion and monotheism. Some even link these tales to ancient Hindu and Buddhist records, which describe a spiritual seeker whose teachings bear remarkable resemblance to those of Jesus. Further adding to the intrigue is the tomb at Rosabal. The shrine, long revered by some Muslims and Hindus, houses a sarcophagus aligned not in the typical Islamic north-south orientation, but east-west, matching ancient Jewish burial customs. Carvings near the tomb depict what appear to be footprints with crucifixion-like markings. Skeptics argue this is coincidence or later embellishment. Believers suggest otherwise. Yet, perhaps the most curious aspect is not the tomb itself, but the man it allegedly belonged to, Uz Asaf. Some historical documents in the region describe Uz Asaf as a prophet-like figure who came from the West, preaching compassion and healing, and who settled in Kashmir after fleeing persecution. The name, some argue, could be a localized corruption of Yehoshua, the Hebrew form of Jesus. Others claim it's simply a fusion of earlier traditions. Could Uz Asaf and Jesus be one and the same? Or are centuries of myth and faith colliding in a case of mistaken identity? Academic consensus still firmly supports the traditional account that Jesus died by crucifixion around 30 AD, and that his body, according to Christian belief, was resurrected and ascended to heaven. But not all traditions agree. The Islamic view, for example, holds that Jesus was not crucified, but instead taken up by God, possibly leaving a physical double behind. Other Gnostic texts hint at even more cryptic possibilities of escape, substitution, or survival. In this space of overlapping beliefs and historical shadows, theories have flourished. Some researchers point to Buddhist influences in Jesus' teachings, his parables, emphasis on inner transformation, and non-violence, as echoes of Eastern philosophy. Is this coincidence or evidence of early exposure to the dharmic traditions of India and Nepal? Ancient trade routes certainly made such journeys possible. By the 1st century BC, caravans moved regularly from Judea to India via the Silk Road and maritime routes through the Arabian Sea. Jewish communities already lived in parts of southern India, especially in Kerala. Could a young seeker, eager, devout, and unusually wise, have joined such a journey? Of course, hard evidence remains elusive. Documents are scarce, oral traditions are fluid, and time has eroded much of what might once have been written or remembered. Many artifacts, if they ever existed, may have been lost, hidden, or destroyed in the centuries of conquest and religious turmoil that followed. Still, something lingers. It may be in the stories told quietly by elders in Ladakh, or in the crumbling manuscripts that line the walls of ancient monasteries. It may be in the strange parallels between far-flung belief systems, or in a tomb quietly maintained on a hillside in Kashmir by caretakers who speak little but watch much. Whether historical truth, spiritual metaphor, or cultural echo, the story of Jesus in India continues to captivate those willing to look beyond official narratives. Could the world's most iconic teacher have found wisdom among the sages of the East? Or is this merely the human desire to connect what is separate, to imagine a bridge between West and East, between faiths and philosophies, between mystery and meaning? The truth remains elusive, waiting, perhaps, in a forgotten scroll, a whispered legend, or the quiet spaces between history's official lines. So we ask again, what really happened during the missing years of Jesus of Nazareth? And what secrets might still lie, hidden in the high places of India, waiting to be uncovered? Beneath the polished stone corridors of Vatican City, far from the public galleries and gilded basilicas, exists a quiet network of rooms where the walls do not echo with prayer, but with records, handwritten documents, sealed letters, ancient case files bound in leather. Some bear titles in Latin, others in Italian, Greek, or Aramaic. Many are undecipherable without context, but a few speak clearly, in the unmistakable language of fear. They are cases of possession, not theatrical tales crafted for cinema, not spinning heads or levitating bodies, but raw, detailed observations recorded by priests, physicians, and theologians over centuries. Strange utterances, sudden, inexplicable knowledge of ancient languages, violent aversions to sacred objects. These reports do not claim to understand, but only to witness. This is the hidden archive of the Church's war against the invisible. The Vatican has long been associated with spiritual authority, guardianship of the faith, and protection from what it deems the forces of evil. But rarely discussed is the breadth of data the Church has quietly accumulated across continents and centuries regarding cases of alleged demonic possession. While most modern religious institutions speak cautiously about the subject, the Vatican approaches it with clinical seriousness. It does not advertise, but it does not dismiss. In fact, it trains. At the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum in Rome, select clergy undergo formal instruction in exorcism, a centuries-old rite codified in the Rituale Romanum of 1614. The revised version, authorized by Pope John Paul II in 1999, remains in use today. But what many do not know is that behind the ceremony lies a deeper body of knowledge, case patterns, psychological assessments, and recurring signs too consistent to ignore. Across these files, something curious begins to emerge, certain traits and behaviors that appear across borders and centuries, often involving people with no connection to each other, no shared language, no knowledge of the rites. Why do victims often speak in languages they've never studied, sometimes long dead, such as Akkadian or Koine Greek? Why do physiological symptoms, aversion to blessed water, contortions beyond the body's limits, appear with eerie regularity? Why are these episodes so frequently preceded by personal trauma, loss, or moments of spiritual crisis? Science offers explanations rooted in dissociative disorders, extreme psychological stress, or cultural suggestion. Neurologists have identified seizure-like episodes, glossolalia, and psychogenic responses as potential causes. And yet, not all cases fit cleanly into these frameworks. One example stands out in the annals of Vatican documentation: the case of Clara Germana Sell, a young woman from South Africa in 1906. Her reports are preserved, partially, in church correspondence. She allegedly spoke multiple languages she had never been exposed to, including German and Polish. Nuns reported her levitating during prayer and violently reacting to the presence of a crucifix, even when it was hidden from her view. Another case, less known but perhaps more troubling, involves a 14-year-old boy in 1949 in the United States, known under the pseudonym Robbie Mannheim. The case would later inspire The Exorcist, but the Church's internal documentation was far more subdued than the dramatized film. Priests described objects moving independently, foreign words etched into the boy's skin, and knowledge of their personal sins, details never made public, yet noted in multiple testimonies. These cases were not handled impulsively. Each underwent extensive investigation, medical, psychological, and theological, before the Church authorized an exorcism. And always, there was a pattern, a threshold where natural explanation seemed to fail. According to several Vatican insiders, a confidential registry is maintained, an informal, evolving database of possession patterns compiled by exorcists worldwide. These reports, anonymized and translated, are compared, analyzed, and in some cases, classified. Some speculate that these patterns may suggest more than just psychological phenomena. They may point, theologically, to something coordinated, something intelligent. But the Church is careful. It does not make such claims openly. Instead, it emphasizes the need for discernment, distinguishing between mental illness and genuine spiritual affliction. Every trained exorcist is taught that most cases are not possessions. They are cries for help, but in a small number, perhaps fewer than 1%, something resists explanation. Could the Vatican be observing a long-term pattern of activity, cycles of possession that correspond to historical, political, or even astronomical events? It is a theory that lingers at the edge of speculation, yet has surfaced in some exorcist circles. Reports suggest an increase in possession claims following periods of cultural upheaval, war, famine, pandemics. Could these be psychological reactions to trauma, or does spiritual vulnerability follow chaos? And then there is the matter of location. Certain places across Europe, Africa, Latin America appear repeatedly in these reports, not because of population size or religious fervor, but because of their histories, ancient pagan sites, battlegrounds, former centers of heretical cults. These areas seem to carry a residual spiritual tension that defies easy measurement. Why? Within the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, once known as the Holy Office of the Inquisition, these matters are handled quietly. Meetings are held, files reviewed. Some cases are discussed only behind closed doors. The Church does not publicize demonic patterns, perhaps out of caution, or perhaps because it still doesn't fully understand them. But that silence has its own weight. What knowledge lies hidden in the classified sections of the Vatican's exorcism reports? What might we learn, not just about spiritual belief, but about the human condition itself, if these patterns were more openly studied? Or perhaps the question is more profound. If evil does, in some form, exist beyond psychology and metaphor, does it leave footprints? The Church may not have all the answers, but behind the silence of its marble walls, it continues to look. And so we are left to wonder, are the patterns we dismiss as myth actually signs? And if so, what are they pointing to? The ancient city of Nicaea, modern-day Iznik in northwestern Turkey, rests quietly by the banks of a tranquil lake. Today, it is a place of faded walls and sleepy olive groves, its days of imperial grandeur long gone. But nearly 1,700 years ago, this unassuming town was the epicenter of a world-shaping decision. Here, in the summer of 325 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine summoned the most powerful bishops of the early Christian world to convene in what would become the first ecumenical council of the Church. It was not held in secret. It was a gathering both political and theological. But even so, something about the Council of Nicaea has continued to provoke whispers, doubts, and speculation. What exactly was said within those halls? What texts were debated or destroyed? And did something more profound happen there, something that still remains hidden beneath layers of dogma and empire? Historically, the Council of Nicaea was convened to bring unity to a fragmented Christian world. Doctrinal disputes had spread throughout the empire like wildfire, chief among them the controversy over the nature of Christ. Was Jesus divine in essence, or created by God as something less than eternal? This conflict, known as the Arian controversy, threatened not only the unity of the Church, but also the stability of the Roman world Constantine was trying to preserve. Over 300 bishops, many from regions as distant as Syria, Egypt, and Gaul, gathered under imperial invitation. They were offered free travel, lodging, and even protection. In return, they were expected to bring order to a fractured faith. The council ultimately produced the Nicene Creed, a foundational statement of belief that declared Jesus as true God from true God, of the same substance as the Father. It marked a turning point in Christian history, establishing the doctrine of the Trinity as central, and labeling Arianism as heresy. So far, this is the version preserved in textbooks and church histories. But behind this official narrative lies something more elusive. What else was discussed in Nicaea? Were decisions made beyond the Christological debate? Some scholars have pointed to gaps in the record, missing letters, fragments of transcripts, and references in later church writings to discussions that do not appear in surviving council documents. According to the Ecclesiastical History of Socrates Scholasticus, written in the 5th century, there were other matters debated, including canonical texts and traditions held only by certain communities. Yet, curiously, these topics disappear from the final conciliar records. Could it be that certain writings, early Gospels, letters, or revelations, were reviewed and deemed too dangerous or unorthodox for inclusion? Indeed, in the years leading up to Nicaea, Christianity was a mosaic of beliefs. Some communities revered Gospels now lost, such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of the Hebrews. Others followed teachings from texts that blended Jewish mysticism with emerging Christian ideas. Some believed Jesus was fully divine from birth, while others saw him as fully human, elevated only at resurrection or baptism. The range of belief was astonishing. And then, after Nicaea, something changed. Many of these texts disappeared. Others were labeled heretical by later councils. Could Nicaea have marked the beginning of a deliberate purge? One of the more persistent theories suggests that the council not only defined orthodoxy, but selected, or perhaps omitted, certain texts from what would become the Christian Bible. The idea that the biblical canon was formalized at Nicaea is often repeated, though historically inaccurate. The canon as we know it wasn't finalized until later councils, and even then, with lingering debate. But that doesn't mean Nicaea played no role. Some researchers argue the council began a process, unofficial but powerful, of marginalizing writings that did not conform to the emerging theological framework. Texts that emphasized inner knowledge, feminine spiritual archetypes, or alternative views of Jesus' role were quietly dismissed. Copies were lost. Others were buried. Only centuries later, most famously with the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945, would some of these writings resurface. Could Nicaea have been the turning point at which certain truths, however one defines them, were intentionally silenced? There are even more controversial whispers, preserved mostly in fringe writings and speculative histories. Some suggest the council had access to early apocalyptic revelations that challenged the power structures of both church and empire. Others claim that prophetic writings, possibly of Essene or Gnostic origin, spoke of cycles of spiritual awakening that conflicted with the eternal authority the bishops sought to establish. One intriguing account appears in later legends surrounding the so-called Vatican Chronicle of Nicaea, an alleged secret record, never authenticated, describing a closed session in which bishops debated the danger of letting laity access mystical knowledge too freely. It describes a moment in which one bishop supposedly warned, "If the people believe they are divine in spirit, what need have they of Rome?" Of course, no such document has ever been found. Yet the idea it proposes, that there may have been discussions the Church chose not to preserve, is not so easily dismissed. What complicates the picture further is the sheer silence that followed the council on certain topics. Early Christian communities, once rich with variation, slowly grew uniform. By the time of later councils, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon, the boundaries of orthodoxy were clearly drawn. Divergence meant exile, imprisonment, or worse. The question lingers: did Nicaea shape belief, or filter it? And if it did, what was lost? Today, the Vatican holds one of the world's most comprehensive collections of Christian manuscripts, some never made public, others accessible only to select scholars. Among these are records of early councils, including Nicaea. What might those archives contain? Early drafts of theological creeds? Personal letters between bishops expressing doubts or disagreements? Mentions of suppressed gospels that never made it into the canon? Or perhaps something even more obscure, documents pointing to esoteric traditions that were ultimately abandoned as too dangerous for public theology? We may never know, but one thing remains clear. Nicaea was more than a council. It was a moment when belief was forged into structure, when diversity was narrowed into creed. And in that process, something may have been left behind. So we must ask, what was truly decided at Nicaea, and what revelations, buried under centuries of silence, might still lie hidden in the shadows of the Vatican's most guarded archives? It is a landscape untouched by time, an endless expanse of ice and wind, where silence reigns and the sun circles the horizon in ghostly arcs. Antarctica, the southernmost continent on Earth, sealed beneath miles of glacial ice, shrouded in mystery and extreme isolation. Few human footsteps have ever touched its interior. Even fewer have left behind stories that challenge the boundaries of known history. Yet among the scattered whispers of forgotten voyages and cryptic archives, a question surfaces, one that seems almost too strange to ask. What was the Vatican doing in Antarctica? And more specifically, what were the Jesuits looking for? The Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits, has long been recognized as the intellectual arm of the Catholic Church. Founded in the 16th century by Ignatius of Loyola, the order quickly became synonymous with rigorous scholarship, scientific inquiry, and missionary zeal. Jesuits mapped rivers in South America, studied astronomy in China, and translated indigenous languages on remote islands. But among the more obscure fragments of historical record, one name appears in an unexpected context: Antarctica. It begins, as many of these puzzles do, in the Vatican archives. In the early 20th century, Italian researchers combing through Vatican correspondence uncovered brief but curious references to a Jesuit-led exploratory mission, allegedly sanctioned in the late 1800s. The documents were vague, letters mentioning a southern expedition to study geological anomalies and natural phenomena beneath the ice. No specific continent was named. Yet the descriptions, polar conditions, magnetic interference, subglacial terrain, point unmistakably to the Antarctic region. What could have drawn the Jesuits to such a remote and hostile environment at a time when the continent had barely been touched by secular explorers? To be clear, mainstream historical records make no mention of an official Jesuit mission to Antarctica. The first recognized landing on the continent occurred in 1821. Substantial scientific expeditions wouldn't begin until the 20th century. Yet questions remain. Why were Jesuit astronomers among the first to study Earth's magnetic fields in the southern hemisphere? Why did several known Jesuit observatories, located as far as Argentina and Tasmania, begin compiling data on southern auroras, months before major expeditions were publicly announced? And then there is the strange case of Father José María Campos, a Spanish Jesuit whose name appears in naval travel records from the 1890s. According to shipping logs, Campos boarded a merchant vessel from Valparaiso, Chile, heading south into the sub-Antarctic waters. The ship's official purpose: supply and observation. But Campos's journals, preserved only in fragments, suggest he was carrying out ecclesiastical reconnaissance. One passage reads, "The southern lights speak in symbols not yet known to man." What did he mean? Over the decades, researchers, both academic and independent, have proposed various theories. Some suggest the Jesuits were conducting magnetic studies, driven by their interest in astronomy and Earth's orientation. Others believe their mission may have been theological, seeking signs of divine origin in the untouched parts of the Earth. But among the more speculative thinkers, a deeper mystery takes form. One theory, admittedly fringe, posits that the Jesuits had knowledge of ancient maps predating European exploration, maps which depicted Antarctica without its ice cover. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, which appears to show the coastline of Antarctica in surprising detail. Some researchers argue that such knowledge could only have come from far older civilizations, perhaps survivors of a forgotten cataclysm. Did the Jesuits, with access to Vatican-held documents, believe they were following the trail of such civilizations? The Vatican has never confirmed the existence of any such materials. But as with so many questions surrounding its archives, the lack of denial only deepens the mystery. What makes the story even more compelling is the peculiar link between Antarctica and cosmology, two areas of deep interest for the Jesuit order. In 1891, Pope Leo XIII formally re-established the Vatican Observatory, placing Jesuit scientists at its helm. Their mission, to explore the heavens, and by extension, the Creator's design. Could it be that the Jesuits believed Antarctica, with its perfect isolation and minimal electromagnetic interference, was the ideal place to observe phenomena invisible elsewhere on Earth? Indeed, modern science has since placed astronomical observatories in Antarctica for precisely this reason. Was the Church, always watching the stars, somehow ahead of its time? And if so, were they merely seeking the divine in creation, or something else entirely? Adding another layer to the enigma is the persistent rumor circulated among Cold War-era researchers of a sealed report issued by a Jesuit team to the Vatican in the 1950s, decades after the alleged early missions. The document, referred to only in second-hand accounts, reportedly detailed strange magnetic irregularities beneath the ice. One passage, quoted but never fully verified, describes a disturbance in the firmament that manifests not above, but below. Could this have referred to the massive subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica's surface, like Lake Vostok, discovered only years later? Or was it pointing to something even less understood? Skeptics argue that all this is coincidence. The Jesuits were scientists and travelers. Their presence in the southern hemisphere is well documented. The rest, they say, is projection, layers of mystery built upon fragments and fiction. Yet others note a recurring pattern. Whenever the Vatican appears near the margins of global exploration, whether in Nicaea, in ancient manuscripts, or at the edge of the world, it is often not the facts that are most revealing, but the silences that surround them. Why did the Vatican express such interest in magnetic anomalies? What compelled Jesuit scholars to brave extreme climates in an era when even survival was uncertain? And what became of the notes, journals, and findings they may have returned with? We may never know. But in the stillness of Antarctica, beneath the ice, under the watch of the stars, there may yet be traces of a story that has not been fully told. And so we ask, did the Jesuits find something in the Deep South? Or were they looking for something the rest of the world had already forgotten? In the quiet, temperature-controlled chambers of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, once known as the Holy Office of the Inquisition, rows of tall wooden cabinets line the walls like silent sentinels. Inside, sealed folders and worn manuscripts preserve centuries of theological judgment. Some are bound in red leather, marked Strictissimus Secretum, strict secrecy. Others bear simple Latin labels, De Heretics, concerning heretics. Most of the names recorded within these walls belong to distant figures, medieval mystics, Enlightenment thinkers, Protestant reformers, philosophers who challenged papal authority. But tucked among the aged parchments and canonical decrees, some say there is another list, one that has never been publicly acknowledged. A list that is not from the 13th or 16th centuries, but from our own time. The whispered name for it is the Index Renovatus, the Renewed Index, a record of modern-day heretics. To understand this shadowed registry, one must begin with a document the Church has officially acknowledged, L'Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Forbidden Books. First issued in 1559 during the fervor of the Counter-Reformation, the Index was the Church's formal list of publications deemed dangerous to faith or morals. It included works by Galileo, Giordano Bruno, and later Jean-Paul Sartre and René Descartes. For centuries, Catholic intellectual life was shaped by the boundaries the Index enforced. But in 1966, amid the winds of reform following the Second Vatican Council, the Church formally abolished the Index. Publicly, it was declared obsolete. But some scholars argue that the Vatican's concern with doctrinal purity never truly ended. It merely went underground. Did the spirit of the Index survive, quietly repurposed, reshaped to fit a modern world? In recent decades, a pattern has emerged. Certain theologians, authors, and clergy members find themselves the subject of Vatican notifications, formal but non-public rebukes warning of doctrinal deviation. In some cases, their work is quietly censored, publishing rights restricted, academic titles withdrawn. The most well-known of these is perhaps Father Leonardo Boff, a Brazilian liberation theologian who was silenced in the 1980s for advocating a theology of social justice that challenged church hierarchy. But Boff was not alone. Father Jacques Dupuy, a Belgian Jesuit, was summoned to Rome in 2000 for suggesting that salvation might be possible outside of explicit Christian belief, a concept that, while discussed openly in many academic circles, triggered doctrinal concerns within the congregation. His books were revised under pressure. Others were issued quiet warnings. And then there are those whose names never make the headlines. Priests removed from parish leadership without public explanation, professors suddenly dismissed from pontifical universities, lay theologians barred from publishing under Catholic presses. Is this merely the Church protecting its tradition? Or is something else at work? Documents leaked by anonymous insiders over the last 20 years suggest that the Vatican may be maintaining an internal classification system, categorizing individuals by theological risk. According to one alleged memo, reviewed but never authenticated by religious journalists, this system includes keywords such as latent heresy, progressive disobedience, and infiltration of esoteric thought. The document, if genuine, implies a quiet but active effort to monitor, evaluate, and contain emerging theological voices. What qualifies as heresy in the 21st century? It is no longer charges of denying the Trinity or transubstantiation that dominate Vatican concern. Instead, it's often ideas that blur doctrinal boundaries, inclusive interpretations of Scripture, openness to interfaith mysticism, calls for female ordination, or public support for LGBTQ+ inclusion in sacramental life. Are these expressions of heresy or the natural evolution of belief in a modern world? The Vatican remains cautious. Its official statements insist that theological oversight is a necessary part of maintaining unity and fidelity. Yet critics argue that silence, censure, and opaque decision-making only deepen the mystery and the fear. Even more unsettling is the suggestion, found in the writings of a few former insiders, that the modern Church may extend its definition of heresy beyond the religious sphere. Some allege that certain journalists, scientists, or even political figures have been flagged internally, not for teaching false doctrine, but for promoting worldviews fundamentally opposed to the Church's moral framework. Is this true? Has the notion of heresy been expanded into a broader philosophical or ideological surveillance? Some researchers believe that with the rise of artificial intelligence, bioethics, and post-humanist thought, the Church feels increasingly pressured to define what constitutes not just spiritual error, but ontological defiance. In other words, heresy not of belief, but of being. If such a list exists, who decides who is on it? And how often is it revised? The Vatican, for its part, does not confirm the existence of any such index. Inquiries are met with vague references to ongoing discernment or matters of internal governance. Yet every now and then a case breaks the surface, a theologian silenced, a book withdrawn, a conference quietly canceled, and somewhere behind those decisions there may be files, names, patterns. Could it be that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has evolved into a silent observer of global belief systems, marking not only those who speak against the Church, but those whose influence threatens to reshape its very foundations? Or perhaps this is a relic of older fears, of a church trying to preserve unity in an age of rapid change. Either way, the silence around the question speaks volumes. What, then, is heresy in an age of information? In a world where faith is no longer localized, where a single book or idea can reach millions in seconds, how does the Vatican protect what it calls orthodoxy? And who ultimately gets to decide where the line is drawn? Some believe that a new index does exist, cloaked in modern language, digital security, and quiet enforcement. Others say the idea belongs in the past, no longer relevant to a church now committed to transparency and dialogue. But somewhere, in the stillness of the Vatican's inner chambers, that question remains. And we are left to wonder, who watches the watchmen of faith? And what names, hidden behind locked doors, might still be labeled as heretic today? In a darkened corner of the Coptic Museum in Cairo, far from the crowds and polished exhibits, lies a fragile fragment of papyrus, yellowed, torn, and incomplete. Its words, written in Sahidic Coptic, drift in and out of coherence. Yet even in their partial form, they speak of something extraordinary. They tell of Mary, not the Virgin Mary, but Mary Magdalene, the enigmatic figure who appears at the margins of the Gospels, whose story has been retold, reshaped, and, some believe, intentionally obscured. This particular manuscript, known as the Gospel of Mary, was discovered in the late 19th century in a private Egyptian collection. 2 additional Greek fragments surfaced decades later. But the text, as we have it, is incomplete. Pages missing, sentences broken, voices silenced by time, or by choice. Mary Magdalene is often portrayed as a repentant sinner, a loyal disciple, a grieving witness at the tomb of Jesus. But early Christian writings offer a far more complex picture, one that suggests she may have held a far greater role in the earliest expressions of the faith. In the Gospel of Mary, she is not a background figure. She is a visionary, a bearer of secret teachings revealed to her by Jesus after his resurrection. In one passage, the male disciples express fear and uncertainty. It is Mary who offers reassurance. It is Mary who speaks with spiritual authority. And yet, this gospel did not make it into the official canon. It was excluded, alongside other texts like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, when church leaders eventually formalized the New Testament. Why? Mainstream scholars point to the chaotic diversity of early Christianity. The first few centuries after Jesus' death saw a proliferation of beliefs and writings. Dozens of Gospels, letters, and apocalypses circulated among communities across the Roman Empire. Many of these texts reflected differing theological perspectives, some emphasizing divine mystery, others focused on human agency and spiritual ascent. The Gospel of Mary, likely written in the 2nd century AD, was part of this broader landscape. Its exclusion, according to official church history, was due to its lack of apostolic origin and doctrinal clarity. It was too speculative, too mystical. But some ask a different question. Was it excluded because of what it said, or who said it? In Mary Magdalene's portrayal within the text, she is not merely a disciple, she is the disciple, chosen to receive inner knowledge, entrusted with teachings too complex for the others to understand. Peter, traditionally viewed as the leader of the early church, is shown questioning Mary's authority. He even accuses her of inventing the teachings. Could this tension reflect a real historical divide in the early Christian movement, one in which female spiritual leadership was not just present, but foundational? Some scholars believe that early Christian communities may have included women in positions of theological authority, preaching and interpreting Scripture. Archaeological evidence from catacombs in Rome shows early Christian art depicting women in postures of blessing and teaching. Epigraphs describe women as presbytera, elders, or even episcopa, female bishops. Could Mary Magdalene have been a symbol, or even the origin, of a suppressed tradition? The Vatican has never formally recognized the Gospel of Mary as authentic scripture, though it has acknowledged its historical significance. Still, access to certain related documents remains restricted. Researchers who have applied for deeper archival access have encountered bureaucratic delays or outright refusals. Some suggest that additional writings attributed to Mary, or referencing her elevated role, may still lie hidden within the Vatican's vast library, stored but never studied. If true, why keep such texts sealed? Do they challenge too deeply the theological structures that have stood for nearly 2 millennia? Or are they simply incomplete fragments, too obscure, too inconsistent to carry real doctrinal weight? Adding to the mystery is the tantalizing suggestion that Mary's voice was not just silenced, but deliberately mischaracterized. By the 6th century, Pope Gregory I delivered a sermon in which he conflated Mary Magdalene with the unnamed sinful woman in Luke's Gospel, a move that cemented her reputation as a penitent prostitute for centuries. This interpretation, though never explicitly stated in Scripture, became widespread in Christian teaching, art, and popular imagination. Only in recent decades has the Catholic Church quietly distanced itself from this portrayal, reclassifying Mary as a witness to the resurrection and a disciple of the Lord. Yet the damage to her legacy lingers. Was this confusion accidental? Or was it a calculated effort to diminish the voice of a woman whose presence threatened the emerging male hierarchy? Then there are the more speculative theories, those found at the margins of academic study and whispered in the halls of alternative history. Some claim that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were not only spiritual companions, but married. That together, they carried a bloodline, a lineage later hidden or erased by church authorities. This theory gained public attention through modern fiction, but its roots lie in older traditions, Gnostic texts that describe Mary as Jesus' consort and speak of sacred union between the masculine and the feminine. These ideas are controversial, unprovable, and dismissed by most scholars. Yet they persist. Why? Because they tap into something deeper, a sense that a part of the original Christian message may have been lost. That the voice of a woman at the heart of the story was not just ignored, but erased. Today, scholars continue to debate the meaning and origin of the Gospel of Mary. New imaging technologies have been used to analyze the manuscript. Digital reconstructions attempt to fill in the missing pages. And still, we are left with a tantalizing fragment, a voice reaching across centuries, offering a vision of spiritual intimacy, inner revelation, and radical equality. What would the Christian story look like if Mary Magdalene's writings had been preserved alongside those of Peter, Paul, and John? How might history have changed if the first witness to the resurrection had also been the first teacher of its meaning? And most haunting of all, what words of hers have we never heard? What teachings still lie hidden, buried in sand or sealed behind the walls of the Vatican, waiting to be brought into the light? Beneath the towering dome of the Vatican Library, sunlight filters through stained glass windows, casting long, colored rays across marble floors. The silence here is palpable, broken only by the soft turning of pages, the occasional creak of old wood, and the quiet breath of time itself. Within these walls, home to one of the largest and most secure collections of ancient texts on Earth, lie manuscripts that have never seen public light. Among them are references, faint and fragmentary, to worlds that supposedly vanished before our own. Civilizations lost not to war or decay, but to water. Flood myths are among the oldest and most universal stories told by human cultures. The Bible's account of Noah and the Great Flood, detailed in the book of Genesis, is just one of many. Similar narratives echo from Mesopotamia, India, China, Mesoamerica, and beyond. The Epic of Gilgamesh, predating Genesis by centuries, tells of a flood that destroys mankind, with a lone survivor carrying knowledge and life forward. Could all these stories simply be archetypes, moral tales passed down through the ages? Or do they hint at a memory buried deep in human history? Within the Vatican's restricted archives, rooms requiring special clearance and guarded around the clock, exist records that some believe point to knowledge of ancient civilizations predating even Sumer and Egypt. These texts, though rarely acknowledged publicly, are said to include obscure translations of Chaldean tablets, early Christian commentaries, and apocryphal scrolls long omitted from canonical doctrine. What secrets might they hold? Some researchers speculate that these texts contain references to civilizations thriving long before recorded history, people said to possess advanced knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and even spiritual science. Traditions whisper of cities lost beneath rising seas, of towers that reached to the heavens, and of a forgotten age when man and the divine walked side by side. Is it possible that Vatican scholars, over centuries, came into possession of texts, perhaps rescued from Alexandria, Byzantium, or ancient Babylon, that preserved echoes of these vanished worlds? The mainstream academic position is cautious. While acknowledging the global presence of flood narratives, most historians regard them as metaphor, expressions of human fear in the face of nature's destructive power, or cultural memory of regional disasters amplified over time. Geologists have documented evidence of massive flooding events, the rapid rise of sea levels at the end of the last ice age, the breaking of glacial lakes in North America, the flooding of the Black Sea basin around 5600 BC. These events, though local in scale, would have felt apocalyptic to the people who witnessed them. But then there are the anomalies, the sites that don't quite fit into accepted timelines. Off the coast of India, submerged ruins near Dwarka appear to suggest urban planning where none should exist. At Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, 12,000-year-old megalithic structures defy conventional understanding of hunter-gatherer capabilities. In Bolivia, the ruins of Pumapunku hint at precision engineering using methods that still puzzle modern architects. Could these be the remnants of civilizations lost in a great flood? And if so, what did they know? Some fringe theorists propose that these ancient peoples had knowledge surpassing even today's understanding in certain fields, particularly in astronomy, geometry, and spiritual insight. They suggest that a pre-flood civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, or a yet unnamed culture, may have encoded information about the cosmos, sacred geometry, and even human consciousness in their monuments and myths. It is here that the Vatican's interest becomes more curious. Several Renaissance-era Vatican documents reference the wisdom of the ancients, a phrase that some scholars believe alludes not to Greece or Rome, but to something older. A few hint at antediluvian knowledge, once protected by Noah and passed to his sons after the flood, eventually absorbed into the esoteric traditions of priesthood and secret societies. Is it coincidence that the Church's earliest theological architects often studied Hebrew mysticism, Egyptian symbolism, and the Platonic idea of a lost age? Or was something more deliberate at work? An attempt to preserve and reinterpret fragments of a deeper truth. One particularly mysterious item is a rumored codex, never displayed publicly, called the Chronica Preaqua, or Chronicle Before the Waters. Allegedly catalogued in the early 1600s, it is said to contain a synthesis of early church commentary, Hermetic teachings, and references to a civilization destroyed by divine judgment. Some believe this text links pre-flood knowledge to the origins of certain church rituals and architectural alignments. Is this simply legend? Or could the Vatican be safeguarding a thread of human history too dangerous or too destabilizing for the world to know? There is also the matter of symbolism. Why do so many basilicas, cathedrals, and chapels across Europe incorporate flood imagery, deluges, arcs, and waves carved into stone or painted on ceilings? Why do certain papal vestments feature motifs of ancient Mesopotamian deities, fish-like figures, serpents, suns, woven in gold thread? Are these remnants of symbolic continuity, or intentional markers of a hidden inheritance? And what of the Book of Enoch, long excluded from the Bible but preserved in the Church's apocryphal libraries? In it, the Watchers, divine beings, descend to earth and teach forbidden knowledge to humankind before the flood. They reveal metallurgy, astronomy, and cosmetics, igniting a chain of events that leads to divine retribution. Though once deemed heretical, this book was revered in early Christian circles and is still referenced in theological discussions today. Is it purely myth or a poetic retelling of something real? Today, as technology allows us to scan beneath the oceans and peer through layers of earth and time, new discoveries continue to emerge, challenging what we thought we knew. Underwater ruins, forgotten manuscripts, unexplained artifacts. Each adds a new puzzle piece to the picture. But if pieces are missing, could they lie not in some remote jungle or sunken abyss, but here, within the shadowed shelves of the Vatican? What might still remain locked away, kept from public scrutiny, not out of malice, but out of fear? Fear that the truth might not only rewrite history, but reshape our understanding of humanity itself. Could the Vatican's silence be a shield, not against heresy, but against revelation? And so we ask, if a civilization once thrived before the flood, what knowledge did it hold? And who, if anyone, still guards its secrets? Beneath the cobbled streets of Rome, where sunlit piazzas echo with footsteps and fountains murmur with the breath of centuries, a darker, colder world sprawls in silence. The Catacombs, narrow, winding corridors carved into ancient limestone, stretch like forgotten veins beneath the eternal city. Walls lined with the bones of the devout and the defiant, chambers heavy with the weight of history. Some are open to the public, popular pilgrimage sites, archaeologically studied, catalogued. But others are not. Locked behind iron gates, shrouded in official silence, and guarded under the auspices of the Vatican itself, certain sections of these catacombs remain entirely off-limits, even to most clergy. Few know how deep they run, how many chambers exist, or what precisely is kept within them. What is it that lies in the restricted zones of these subterranean networks? And why has the Church gone to such lengths to ensure they remain unseen? Historically, the catacombs of Rome were constructed as burial grounds for early Christians during times of persecution under the Roman Empire. Dug between the 2nd and 5th centuries AD, they served not only as cemeteries but as secret meeting places, chapels, and repositories for sacred relics. Over time, as Christianity emerged from the shadows and became the state religion, many of these catacombs were sealed, preserved, or sanctified. Today, archaeologists and theologians alike acknowledge the cultural and spiritual importance of these underground sanctuaries. The catacombs of San Callisto, San Sebastiano, and Priscilla are among those open for study and respectful visitation. Yet even within these well-known sites, There are passageways that suddenly end at locked doors, sealed with little explanation, their destinations marked only on confidential ecclesiastical maps. According to some insiders, the Vatican directly controls access to at least a dozen subterranean sections that are not listed in public inventories. What lies behind these barriers remains a matter of speculation, and speculation, especially when paired with secrecy, tends to invite mystery. There are official explanations, of course. The Church maintains that many closed sections are simply unstable, dangerous due to age, prone to collapse, or too fragile to preserve if exposed to human interference. Others are said to house human remains that have not yet been fully examined, or relics still undergoing theological scrutiny. But there are hints, scattered across decades of archival leaks, researcher testimonies, and whispers from within ecclesiastical circles that suggest something deeper. Stories of chambers lined not just with bones, but with stone inscriptions in unknown or extinct languages. Murals that depict biblical events in ways that challenge orthodoxy. Sarcophagi that bear symbols not aligned with traditional Christian iconography, but more reminiscent of Gnostic, Egyptian, or even pre-Abrahamic imagery. Could these chambers hold evidence of syncretic religious practices? Do they contain texts or relics that might disrupt the official narrative of Christian history? One of the most compelling stories surrounds the so-called Catacombs immemorati, the unremembered catacombs. Mentioned briefly in an 1883 internal Vatican memorandum uncovered by an Italian archivist in the 1970s, these catacombs were allegedly rediscovered during 17th century renovations near the Basilica of San Lorenzo. According to the report, initial access was granted to a small team of theologians and papal historians. Within days, the site was sealed. No public record of what was found was ever released. Fragments of that memorandum describe inscriptions antedating the apostolic era and doctrinal anomalies not aligned with sacred tradition. The document was quickly reclassified, and the archivist who brought it to light reportedly lost his university post within a year. Was it a hoax, a misinterpretation, or a cover-up? In other stories, drawn from the accounts of a few former Swiss guards and lay Vatican workers, there are mentions of vast descending staircases hidden behind false walls, of vaults that store not bones or manuscripts, but metal artifacts, unknown in origin, possibly pre-Christian. One persistent claim even speaks of a sarcophagus, sealed in black basalt, carved with symbols resembling those found at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, an archaeological site dated to at least 9600 BC. How could such an artifact have found its way beneath Christian Rome? Is it even real? Or merely a fabrication woven from half-heard whispers and overactive imaginations? And if real, why keep it hidden? Then there is the question of who has access. Only a select few, members of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and certain pre-approved researchers bound by strict confidentiality agreements, are allowed beyond the sealed catacomb gates. Even most cardinals have never stepped inside. Journalists have repeatedly requested access to these sites, only to be met with silence or redirection. Independent investigators, when persistent, often find themselves facing sudden revocation of credentials, unexplained denials of entry, or polite but firm warnings to abandon their inquiries. Why such intense control over what, ostensibly, are historical burial sites? Some believe the Vatican fears that discoveries within these catacombs might challenge core tenets of faith, perhaps offering alternative interpretations of Christ's teachings, or evidence of early Christian sects that held wildly different beliefs than those later canonized. Others suggest that the catacombs may contain relics that contradict timelines of religious history, or even point to unknown civilizations, echoes of pre-flood societies, or remnants of esoteric traditions absorbed and then buried by the Church. And then, there are those who think the truth is more metaphysical than material, that these underground spaces are not just physical vaults, but spiritual thresholds, that beneath the layers of stone and bone lie sacred geometries, energy lines, or portals preserved in secrecy, not to hide knowledge, but to protect it. Whatever the reason, the Vatican remains resolute in its silence. What could be so powerful, so potentially destabilizing, that it must be hidden even from the faithful? And perhaps more importantly, does the silence suggest guardianship or fear? As we continue deeper into the hidden world of Vatican mysteries, one cannot help but wonder, what secrets lie in the cold, dark catacombs beneath Rome, still sealed behind iron doors? And if they were ever opened, what story would they tell us about the history we thought we knew? As our journey beneath Vatican City's sealed catacombs fades into the shadows behind us, we now shift our gaze upward, beyond the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, past the clouds, and into the vast, silent architecture of the cosmos. But even in the realm of stars and distant signals, it seems the Vatican may have more knowledge than it publicly admits. At the edge of the Papal Gardens, nestled discreetly within the Albano Hills southeast of Rome, lies the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical institutions in the world. The domes are modest, the grounds peaceful. Birdsong floats over ancient stone as Jesuit scientists quietly go about their work. From here, telescopes point skyward not only toward constellations, but toward questions that have haunted humanity for millennia. Are we alone in the universe? And more curiously, does the Vatican already know the answer? The Vatican Observatory, officially known as the Spicola Vaticana, was established in its modern form in 1891 under Pope Leo XIII. Its mission was to demonstrate that the Church did not oppose scientific progress, that faith and reason could coexist. Since then, Jesuit astronomers have participated in major international projects, co-authored peer-reviewed research, and operated some of the world's most advanced telescopic equipment, including the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, VATT, in Mount Graham, Arizona. On the surface, this is a story of academic pursuit, but beneath it, a deeper layer begins to emerge. Several former officials and researchers close to Vatican scientific circles have alluded, often obliquely, to the existence of classified correspondence and sealed records, documents detailing strange signals, anomalous atmospheric phenomena, and even communications received that could not be easily explained. Is it possible that the Vatican, a religious institution, might be receiving or interpreting messages from beyond Earth? That question may seem like science fiction. Yet, the Vatican has made unusually frequent and candid public statements about the existence of extraterrestrial life. In 2008, Father José Gabriel Funes, then director of the Vatican Observatory, stated in an interview with L'Osservatore Romano that belief in intelligent alien life doesn't contradict our faith. He went further, calling extraterrestrials our brothers in creation. This openness from one of the Church's top astronomers prompted a wave of speculation. Was this simply philosophical positioning, preparing the faithful for a future scientific discovery? Or was it something else? A subtle disclosure, carefully managed? Within Vatican archives, those not open to the public, researchers believe there may be records going back to the early modern era that reference unusual celestial phenomena. One oft-cited example is a letter, supposedly written in the 17th century by Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci from China, in which he describes heavenly vessels that moved against the wind, glowing silently in formation. The letter is referenced in certain bibliographies, but no public copy exists today. Then there are the documents alleged to exist in the classified section of the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, now known as the Vatican Apostolic Archive. According to a few second-hand claims, this archive contains references to radio signals intercepted in the 1920s, investigated jointly with European physicists and later classified under papal seal. Some even claim that Vatican radio infrastructure, expanded in the mid-20th century under Pope Pius XII, was quietly repurposed, at least in part, for the reception and monitoring of unidentified signals from deep space. Is there any direct evidence? Nothing that has been publicly verified. But then again, the Vatican has an unparalleled tradition of preserving information over millennia, keeping it guarded until the Church decides the time is right. The most provocative theories suggest that extraterrestrial contact, either direct or through intercepted transmissions, has already occurred, and that the Church has maintained a secret dialogue over the decades. These ideas may seem fantastic, yet they are given weight by curious patterns. Why has the Vatican shown such an interest in space and astrobiology in recent years? Why did high-level church officials attend global symposia on exoplanets and alien intelligence, conferences where many religious representatives were notably absent? And why has the Vatican positioned itself so carefully as an institution that would embrace contact, even while many governments refuse to comment at all? Fringe researchers point to an alleged document known only as the Vatican Protocol, rumored to have originated during the Cold War. According to claims that surfaced in the 1990s, this protocol outlines how the Church would respond to verifiable extraterrestrial communication. It supposedly includes moral frameworks for interspecies dialogue, contingency plans for theological questions, and outlines of papal statements that could be issued under various scenarios. There is no proof of such a document. The Vatican denies its existence. And yet, there are those within theological circles who quietly admit such planning would make sense. After all, if humanity were to confirm the existence of intelligent, non-human life, it would not be merely a scientific event. It would be a spiritual reckoning. Would the creation story have to be reinterpreted? Could Jesus' sacrifice be understood as universal or earthbound? Would we find common ground in the stars, or face challenges to faith as we know it? In 2014, Pope Francis himself made headlines by stating that he would baptize a Martian if they requested it, an offhand remark perhaps, but one made within the context of a broader discussion about inclusion and universality. It was dismissed by some as metaphor, but to others it was a signal that the Church, despite its ancient roots, is preparing quietly for something more. Are these merely academic reflections, or breadcrumbs leading to something larger? Could the Vatican be the holder of secrets not only of this world, but of others? Or are we simply projecting our own curiosity onto an institution that has mastered the art of silence? In a world where science and belief still struggle to reconcile, the Vatican stands at a unique crossroads. It holds the weight of centuries of doctrine, but also a telescope pointed toward the stars. And so, we're left to wonder, if contact has already happened or is in motion, who would tell us? And would we believe them? Perhaps the answer lies not in space, but buried in the corridors of a library that only a handful have ever seen. As our eyes return from the distant cosmos, from theories of celestial contact and unknown intelligences, we find ourselves once again surrounded by stone and shadow. Beneath the great vaults of the Vatican, among shelves of parchment, iron-clad doors, and candlelit corridors, lies a mystery not of space, but of spirit. A mystery that whispers of ancient rituals, secret instruction, and a centuries-old war, not fought with weapons, but with prayer. In a quiet, guarded wing of the Vatican Apostolic Archive, far from the reach of the public or even most clergy, is said to rest a manuscript known only by few outside the Church. A manual for the training of exorcists, a text so obscure, so rarely acknowledged, that its very existence remains a point of contention. To the world, exorcism is a subject often relegated to folklore or cinema, a dramatic relic of the medieval mind. But within Vatican circles, it is a practice governed by ritual, hierarchy, and discipline. Far from theatrical, it is considered methodical and dangerous. The Church officially recognizes the rite of exorcism, a text revised and reissued in 1999 under the Latin title De Exorcismis et Supplicationibus Quibus Dam. But this publicly available manual is broad in scope, designed more as a liturgical guideline than a field manual. And yet, there are rumors of something far more specific. A text not meant for the general clergy, not kept in seminaries or libraries, but handed directly, quietly to a chosen few. Could there truly exist a classified manual for exorcists, one that delves deeper than any public rite ever could? The story begins with subtle inconsistencies, testimonies from former clergy, whispers from inside seminaries, even hints dropped by exorcists themselves in rare interviews. Father Gabriele Amorth, the late chief exorcist of Rome, served the Church in this role for over 3 decades. Before his death in 2016, he repeatedly hinted that much of what he knew and practiced was not found in the standard Roman ritual. In his writings, he referenced instructions passed down orally and teachings not for publication. But what if those teachings were not purely oral? What if they were drawn from a hidden document? According to one former seminary professor, who spoke anonymously to an Italian investigative journal in 2013, there is a volume informally referred to as the Libellus Obscura, or the Dark Booklet. Bound in black leather without a title, the manual is said to include practical directives for recognizing possession, specific Latin invocations not found in the public rite, signs of spiritual deception, and methods of psychological discernment. Even more intriguingly, it allegedly contains warnings, descriptions of cases in which the possessed were able to mimic spiritual healing, manipulate clergy, or physically affect their environment in ways that defy current scientific understanding. Skeptics argue that this is simple myth-making, a way to add weight to an already mysterious office. But the secrecy surrounding the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, once known as the Holy Office of the Inquisition, adds credibility to the idea that such documents might exist. After all, for centuries this body was charged with detecting heresy, combating spiritual deviation, and yes, authorizing exorcisms. Is it so implausible that somewhere within its locked chambers, a confidential handbook was written, updated, and handed down only to those who had taken a sacred vow of silence? What would such a text even contain? Could it detail encounters not just with psychological illness or metaphorical demons, but with phenomena that resist all medical and scientific diagnosis? Could it record cases where multiple priests failed to expel a presence, where the afflicted spoke in ancient tongues, described events they had no way of knowing, or exhibited strength and resistance impossible to explain? Some scholars believe that fragments of this alleged manual may be hidden in plain sight. In a little-known annex of the Vatican Library lies a 17th century volume titled Precepta Spirituum Discernendorum, translated loosely as Instructions for Discerning Spirits. It is catalogued but not digitized, and available only by special request. The book includes diagrams of human anatomy annotated with references to demonic pathways, prayers written backwards, and footnotes in Greek referencing early desert monastic writings on spiritual warfare. One footnote, written in Latin, refers cryptically to a black ledger kept for the education of Rome's sacred defenders. No further information is given. Scholars who have studied the text note that its margins have been heavily redacted and that several pages appear to have been removed. Could this be a clue? Further deepening the mystery is the Vatican's tight control over modern exorcist training. In Rome, the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum hosts an annual course titled Exorcism and the Prayer of Liberation. It is attended by hundreds of clergy from around the world. But despite the public nature of the course, certain sessions are closed door, off limits even to most attendees. Recordings are prohibited. Notes are not shared. What precisely is being taught in those moments? One priest who attended the course in 2018 remarked, anonymously, that a strikingly detailed casebook was presented, containing possessions that spanned continents and decades, and that one of the instructors quoted from a source none of us had seen before or since. Was this the hidden manual, or just another layer of the Church's carefully maintained mystique? In the end, what makes this mystery so enduring is not just the secrecy, but the gravity of the subject itself. If such a manual exists, it may not simply be a list of procedures. It may be a repository of centuries of spiritual confrontation, a record of what happens when human belief collides with something other. It would also be a document of immense power, one capable of shaping how the Church responds to what it sees as the most serious threats to the soul. So we are left with questions. Does this manual truly exist? If so, why is it hidden? And what would it mean for the Church and for the world if it were ever revealed? Perhaps. The answer remains locked behind stone walls, known only to those who walk quietly between the sacred and the supernatural. As we leave behind the quiet chambers where sacred texts on exorcism may lie hidden in locked drawers and whispered liturgies, we descend, figuratively and perhaps symbolically, into darker and far more unsettling territory. Not into a place of scripture, but into the folds of myth, allegation, and fear. Into the recesses of the human psyche where belief collides with horror, and where secrecy, true secrecy, leaves more than questions. It leaves silence. At the heart of this next mystery is a name spoken rarely, and only in hushed tones. The Ninth Circle. Its name evokes Dante Alighieri's Inferno, where the lowest ring of hell is reserved not for the impure or the wrathful, but for traitors. Those who betray trust, family, kin, God. And so, it is perhaps no coincidence that this alleged entity, or network as some claim, bears such a name. The Ninth Circle is not an officially acknowledged organization. No seal marks its documents. No charter outlines its mission. And yet, its reputation looms like a specter, stretching across decades of quiet investigations, whispered testimonies, and scattered allegations. But what, exactly, is the Ninth Circle? And how, if at all, does it touch the sacred walls of the Vatican? The story begins not with a relic or a document, but with an unearthed whisper, emerging first in obscure testimonies from former clergy, and later, more loudly, in international legal proceedings. Over the past 20 years, several independent researchers and fringe investigators have alleged the existence of a clandestine cult operating across Europe and North America, one that, they say, traces back centuries, and whose alleged membership includes individuals in positions of extreme influence, religious, political, and economic. At the center of this theory lies the Vatican. Some claim that the Ninth Circle represents a rogue order, one so deeply embedded within certain ecclesiastical and aristocratic circles that its actions have evaded oversight for generations. that it is not a product of faith, but a corruption of it. A hidden cabal cloaked in ritual, alleged to conduct acts so unspeakable that even the suggestion sparks immediate denial. But such claims, sweeping, disturbing, and difficult to prove, require careful scrutiny. What evidence, if any, supports them? One of the most widely referenced allegations comes from a controversial source, Kevin Annett, a former United Church of Canada minister turned whistleblower. Annett has spent decades documenting testimonies from Indigenous communities in Canada regarding abuse and neglect within church-run residential schools. Over time, some of these testimonies evolved to include claims of covert gatherings, ritual practices, and disappearances, often in connection with individuals purported to be linked to religious institutions. Annett and others have named the Ninth Circle specifically, alleging that this group uses obscure ceremonial rites, often echoing or distorting ancient Christian liturgy, and that some of its gatherings occurred near or within historic Catholic properties. In 2014, the so-called International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels, an unrecognized body operating outside any formal legal system, issued symbolic convictions against high-profile figures in connection with these allegations. The Vatican, along with governments and other institutions, categorically denied all claims. To mainstream observers, the evidence was insufficient, the proceedings irregular, and the conclusions unsubstantiated. And yet, the questions remain. A curious thread that adds fuel to these theories is the historic record of secrecy and scandal within certain sectors of the Church. The Vatican, while a spiritual heart for over 1 billion Catholics, has faced serious and well-documented crises: the concealment of sexual abuse by clergy, the destruction or suppression of archival records, and the controversial role of institutions like the Sodalidium Christianae Vitae, later accused of systematic abuses under a mask of orthodoxy. These real events do not prove the existence of a group like the Ninth Circle, but they have created fertile ground for speculation, where the line between criminal cover-up and alleged cult activity becomes increasingly blurred. Even stranger, however, is the connection some theorists draw between this mystery and architecture itself. Within the Vatican museums, past the gilded ceilings and corridors lined with Renaissance masterpieces, lie rooms most tourists never see. One such place is the so-called Sala del Giudizio, the Hall of Judgment, where early blueprints suggest once stood an underground crypt sealed sometime in the 19th century. Some Vatican archivists have acknowledged its existence, but say it contains only decommissioned relics and discarded statuary. Others claim it was once used by a secret ecclesiastical tribunal, an arm of the Church known as the Militia Christi, now defunct. A more speculative fringe theory links this site to the Ninth Circle, suggesting that certain elements of the Church, long since hidden or expelled, once utilized isolated spaces for unofficial gatherings, some ritualistic in nature, some disciplinary. Is there any proof? No. But the very mention of such locations, documented in the Vatican's own architectural records, raises unsettling possibilities. The question we are left with is one of plausibility. Could an organization like the Ninth Circle exist, not as a visible society, but as a decentralized network, bound by ideology or shared secrecy rather than institutional authority? Could layers of truth and fiction have merged over time, creating a myth that acts as a container for real fears about abuse, betrayal, and the limits of faith? And if such a group does not exist in name or structure, might its spirit persist nonetheless, through those who act in shadow, beneath the very institutions meant to bring light? We may never know. The Vatican, by its nature, remains opaque in many of its internal affairs. It shields not only secrets of doctrine, but secrets of human fallibility, guilt, and, perhaps, transgression. When the walls are thick and the corridors are ancient, how many doors remain locked? And behind them, what still waits? The ninth circle, whether fact, fiction, or something in between, stands as a symbol of the Church's most terrifying possibility, that even the holiest of places may harbor the darkest of shadows. And so we ask, what lies deeper than doctrine? What truths remain too dangerous to reveal? And if there is a ninth circle, who is already standing at its center? Beyond the great bronze doors of St. Peter's Basilica, past the massive marble columns and the centuries-old Pietà, there lies a quieter part of the Vatican few speak of, and even fewer ever see. It is not a place of worship, but of preservation. Beneath the Apostolic Palace and deep under the Vatican Library sits the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, the Vatican's secret archives. Row upon row of ancient parchment scrolls, bound codices, lost gospels, heretical correspondences, and doctrinal drafts line the long, dark corridors. The air here is thick with the scent of aged paper and centuries-old ink, as if time itself were being held in suspension. Somewhere in this labyrinth, researchers believe, there once existed documents that spoke of a very different Christian worldview, one that included the concept of reincarnation. And then, they vanished. The idea that reincarnation may have once been considered part of early Christian doctrine seems implausible at first glance. Christianity, as taught for the past 16 centuries, focuses on a linear view of life and the soul: birth, death, judgment, and an eternal destination, heaven or hell. Reincarnation, by contrast, suggests something circular, an ongoing spiritual evolution through multiple lifetimes. But if one looks back far enough, into the first few centuries after the death of Christ, the picture grows murkier. Among the early followers of Jesus were numerous sects, each interpreting his teachings through different philosophical and cultural lenses. Some of these, such as the Gnostics, held views that diverged significantly from what later became mainstream orthodoxy. The Gnostics believed in secret knowledge, gnosis, that could awaken the divine spark within. Their writings speak of the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes, learning and purifying itself through experience. Fragments of these beliefs echo in early Christian writings that predate the official canon. One name often linked to this mystery is Origen of Alexandria, a respected Christian theologian and scholar of the 3rd century A.D. Origen, though controversial, was widely read and influential in early Christian thought. He believed that the soul existed before birth, and that it passed through stages of learning, possibly across different lifetimes. In his De Principiis, he writes of the soul's descent into the material world and the possibility of returning to a state of spiritual purity through knowledge and transformation. Though he never used the term reincarnation in the way we might today, Origen's teachings suggest a worldview not unlike the reincarnational philosophies of Eastern traditions. He even speculated that the soul, after death, could return in new forms, perhaps even across different realms of existence. And yet, centuries later, Origen's views were condemned. At the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD, during the reign of Emperor Justinian, a series of anathemas were issued, some specifically targeting Origen's alleged belief in the pre-existence of souls and their transmigration. The Church deemed such ideas heretical, and slowly, they disappeared from accepted doctrine. But here is where the mystery deepens. Many scholars believe that prior to this condemnation, early Christian communities preserved teachings that allowed for a more fluid understanding of the soul. Some of these may have existed in written form, letters, sermons, scrolls, that were later suppressed, destroyed, or hidden away? Did the Vatican remove references to reincarnation from the early canon? We may never know. But tantalizing hints remain. In 1945, a cache of ancient texts was discovered near Nag Hammadi, Egypt. These Gnostic Gospels, long buried in clay jars, included writings not found in the New Testament: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the enigmatic Pistis Sophia. Some of these texts reference repeated lives, cycles of purification, and the soul's journey through realms. The Church has never accepted these texts as canonical. But why were they hidden? And what other documents, perhaps even more explicit, have not yet been found, or were never meant to be? Speculation grows around the notion that during the early centuries of Christianity, when doctrine was still being debated, certain bishops and theologians believed in a broader cosmology than what eventually became dogma. And as the Church moved toward unification and political power, clarity was favored over ambiguity. Reincarnation, associated with Greek philosophy and Eastern thought, was deemed dangerous, too easily misinterpreted, too subversive to hierarchical authority. In the Vatican's secret archives, researchers are granted limited access to historical material, but only with approval from Church authorities. Some have reported tantalizing descriptions in archived catalogs, entries with vague titles like "On the Return of the Soul" or "The Cycles of Purification." Yet these documents are, curiously, unavailable for public examination. Are they benign theological commentaries, or remnants of a lost spiritual framework, one that allowed for the soul's return to the world not just once, but many times? In the modern era, the question of reincarnation in Christianity has not disappeared. Figures such as Carl Jung, the famed psychoanalyst, wrote extensively on the concept of the archetypal soul and the possibility of multiple lifetimes shaping human consciousness. Even within Catholic mysticism, echoes of cyclical rebirth appear, though always veiled in metaphor. So we are left with a paradox. If the earliest followers of Christ considered reincarnation a part of divine truth, why was it erased? Was it a matter of theology or power? Was it simply a correction of doctrinal error, or the silencing of something more complex, something that threatened the Church's growing structure and influence? Today, the Vatican maintains that reincarnation has never been part of authentic Christian belief, but the evidence is not so easily dismissed. From Origen's musings to the lost Gospels, to catalogued entries in the Church's own archives, a faint trail of smoke suggests a fire long extinguished, or perhaps still smoldering, deep beneath the marble halls. Might those removed documents, if ever revealed, reshape what we understand about life, death, and the soul's true journey? Or will they remain locked away, out of reach and out of time, guarded not only by stone walls and iron keys, but by centuries of silence? What if the soul does return? And what if the Church once knew? Beneath the gleaming facade of St. Peter's Basilica, past the soft echo of footsteps on centuries-old marble and the faint scent of candle wax in the air, there is a place few pilgrims ever imagine exists. Far below the grandeur of Bernini's baldachin, beneath Michelangelo's majestic dome, the very bedrock of the Vatican hides something older, darker, and infinitely more mysterious. Down here in the heart of Vatican Hill, the stone becomes colder. The light, what little there is, falls away in dusky layers. Ancient corridors wind through the foundations like veins, and somewhere in this shadowed maze, a door stands sealed. It leads, according to whispered accounts, into a chamber that does not appear on any public map. They call it the room beneath the fisherman's tomb, a secret space buried deep below the altar of St. Peter's Basilica. Is it real? Or is it just another Vatican legend, one more thread in a tapestry woven from half-truths and silence? To begin understanding this mystery, we must return to the origins of the Basilica itself. According to church tradition, St. Peter, one of Jesus' 12 apostles, was executed in Rome around 64 AD during the reign of Emperor Nero. He was crucified upside down and buried in a simple grave on Vatican Hill. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine, having converted to Christianity, ordered the construction of a grand basilica atop what was believed to be Peter's final resting place. Over time, that modest church was replaced by the towering Renaissance structure we see today. But remarkably, the church never destroyed Peter's original tomb. Instead, they built upward, layer upon layer, protecting the sacred site as the centuries advanced. In 1939, during renovations following the death of Pope Pius XI, excavations beneath the basilica led to a shocking discovery: an ancient necropolis, hidden for over 1,500 years. Archaeologists uncovered mausoleums, inscriptions, and eventually, bones. The Vatican announced that the remains were, in all likelihood, those of St. Peter himself. But that wasn't all they found. According to notes from those early excavations, there were references, quiet, oblique references, to something else, a sealed room, walled off behind thick masonry located beyond the known tomb structure. Some researchers at the time believed it to be an accidental chamber, perhaps a disused Roman crypt. Others weren't so sure. One of the most persistent rumors came not from archaeologists, but from within the church itself. A handful of clergy close to the excavation team claimed that during one late-night dig, a narrow entrance was discovered, an arched doorway made of pale travertine, almost entirely buried beneath rubble. For reasons never made public, the doorway was resealed the next morning under Vatican orders. No official comment was given. No maps were released. To this day, the Vatican maintains that all rooms beneath the basilica have been thoroughly documented, but not everyone is convinced. In the decades since, a number of scholars and fringe historians have speculated about what might lie behind the sealed door. Some suggest it's nothing more than a forgotten burial chamber, disconnected from Peter's tomb. Others wonder whether it could be a storage space for sacred artifacts too controversial to be displayed. And then, there are the more provocative theories. Could the chamber contain texts from early Christianity, books or scrolls that diverge from modern doctrine? Is it possible that relics from the pre-Christian world were hidden here during the Church's rise to power? Pagan artifacts preserved not out of reverence, but fear? One hypothesis, drawn from apocryphal texts and Gnostic traditions, suggests that the chamber holds relics associated not with Peter, but with Mary Magdalene. These claims, impossible to verify, hint at a far more complex history than we're commonly told. There are even theories, far outside the mainstream, that speak of an underground meeting space used by a select few cardinals for rites not recorded in any liturgical calendar. Of course, such ideas are routinely dismissed by the Church as fantasy, or worse, heresy. But even fantasy can leave footprints. In 2006, a researcher studying blueprints of the basilica's substructures noticed an oddity: a large rectangular space, unmarked, located beneath the floor plan of the central altar. When inquiries were made, access was quietly denied. No explanation followed. That researcher's findings were never published. He later stated cryptically, "Some doors in the Vatican do not open with keys. They open with silence." And yet silence itself can be revealing. In the Vatican, where centuries of secrets have been locked behind velvet drapes and gilded walls, absence often speaks louder than presence. Why, for instance, was such a space never referenced in public excavation reports? Why were certain areas, noted in initial surveys, removed from later records? Is the room simply too fragile to open, or is it too dangerous? From time to time, whispers resurface. of voices heard beyond sealed stone, of candles flickering in empty crypts, of church guards stationed not to protect something, but to contain it. A Vatican archivist, speaking anonymously, once claimed that there is a place no one names beneath the Basilica. When pressed, he refused to elaborate, saying only, "It is older than Peter." What could he have meant? Is it possible that the Church, in its effort to protect the legacy of Christ's apostle, uncovered something even more ancient? Something Roman? Something pagan? Or something that doesn't fit into any known history? Today, access to the necropolis is heavily restricted. Guided tours do exist, but only along approved paths, under watchful supervision, and never deeper than the known tomb. No one, scholar or tourist, is allowed near the area said to house the sealed room. And so the mystery remains. Does a hidden chamber lie beneath one of the holiest places in Christendom? And if so, what lies inside? A forgotten tomb? A collection of banned relics? A remnant of Rome's occult past? Or perhaps something the Church believes humanity is not yet ready to face? In a place built to honor light, could there still be something hidden in shadow? Something waiting? Just beyond the bronze doors of the Apostolic Palace, in a chamber known only to a few, lies a gilded manuscript room, silent, cold, and untouched by sunlight. Here, beneath layers of dust and reverence, leather-bound tomes sit undisturbed, each one inscribed with strange names and veiled warnings. Among them are ancient texts from the early Church Fathers, forbidden prophecies, and annotated copies of scripture that never reached the public eye. And buried deep within this private archive, scholars whisper of something far more disturbing: coded passages and fragments of analysis, compiled over centuries, that attempt to answer a question the Church has never officially resolved. Who, or what, is the Antichrist? The term Antichrist first appears not in Revelation, as many believe, but in the letters of John. Children, it is the last hour, and just as you heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. 1 John 2:18. The ambiguity is striking. There is no name, no face, only a shadow. By the time the book of Revelation was written, likely near the end of the 1st century AD, the Antichrist had begun to take form in the Christian imagination. A false Messiah who would deceive the faithful, perform false miracles, and rule the world in defiance of God. But curiously, the name Antichrist does not appear in Revelation at all. Instead, readers are presented with symbols: the beast from the sea, marked by the number 666, the whore of Babylon, drunk with the blood of saints, and the dragon, a dark echo of Satan himself. The Church has long treated these images as allegorical, representative of evil in its many forms. Yet for centuries, theologians and mystics alike have asked, could they point to a real figure? Could the Antichrist walk among us? During the early medieval period, Church thinkers debated fiercely over the nature of this figure. Was the Antichrist a man, a spirit, an institution? Some argued he would rise as a political leader, perhaps a false prophet or tyrant cloaked in righteousness. Others believed the Antichrist would be born of Jewish descent, possibly even in Jerusalem, as a perversion of the Second Coming. Still others warned that he would infiltrate the Church itself. By the 12th century, Catholic mystic Hildegard of Bingen wrote of visions in which the Antichrist would be conceived in iniquity, raised with secret knowledge, and crowned not in the wilderness, but from within the Church hierarchy. Her prophecies, preserved under lock and key in the Vatican for generations, were deemed too provocative for the public. Even Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, revered by the Vatican, warned in veiled language that the throne of Peter is not immune to deception. Was this hyperbole or something more? In 1517, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the doors of Wittenberg, he wasn't just protesting indulgences. He later claimed, with stunning audacity, that the Pope himself was the Antichrist. The accusation echoed through the Reformation, and though the Catholic Church condemned it as heretical slander, the idea lingered. To this day, some Protestant groups still hold to this belief, not out of animosity, but from a conviction rooted in centuries-old interpretation. The Vatican has never officially responded to such claims beyond rejection, yet its internal documents reveal a more complex concern. Some theologians within the Church, particularly in the 17th and 18th centuries, privately examined the possibility of apostasy from within. A few went as far as to draft warning protocols for future popes. What frightened them most wasn't external persecution. It was the possibility of the Church being slowly, quietly turned from within. One of the most curious and cryptic documents housed in the Vatican Library is known as Codex 5. Its full title remains classified. Allegedly composed in the 13th century by a cardinal exorcist named Pietro della Torre, the manuscript is said to contain profiles of individuals believed to have been possessed by a singular, recurring presence across multiple centuries. The text describes a figure who appears to change names, faces, and voices, but whose doctrine remains disturbingly consistent: the rejection of sacrifice, the manipulation of Scripture, and the call for a new, worldly kingdom. The writer of Codex 5 concludes, chillingly, that the Antichrist has no need to be born, only to be remembered. Is this evidence of a real entity, or merely an expression of medieval superstition? In recent decades, the mystery has deepened. In 1972, Pope Paul VI famously declared, "The smoke of Satan has entered the Church of God." He did not elaborate, but the phrase has been dissected ever since. Some interpret it as a metaphor for modernism or secularism. Others believe it hints at a deeper spiritual corruption. Oddly, just months before that statement, several high-ranking cardinals convened a private session, records sealed, on the matter of internal threats to the continuity of apostolic truth. The minutes of that session, if they still exist, are said to reference a persona inversa, an inverted person. The terminology is unfamiliar in standard Catholic doctrine. Was it code, a warning, or something else entirely? And then there is the number 666, perhaps the most infamous numerical cipher in human history. Revelation 13:18 tells us, "Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." Over time, names as varied as Nero, Napoleon, and even modern political figures have been suggested. Yet none have satisfied every condition. The Vatican's own scholars have never issued a definitive explanation. Instead, the number continues to surface in unexpected places. Carved into the margins of medieval manuscripts, hidden in architectural alignments, or scribbled in the private journals of priests who died under mysterious circumstances. Is it a code, a date, a name? And more importantly, has someone already cracked it? Today, no church official claims to know the identity of the Antichrist. Some argue the figure is purely symbolic, a warning of unchecked power and moral decay. Others believe he has not yet come, and a few, more quietly, fear he already has. Could the Antichrist be a political leader, rising under the guise of peace? A spiritual voice, subtly distorting truth? Or something older, something we have not yet dared to name? In a church built on the promise of redemption, how close are we to the shadow it was always meant to resist? And if the answer lies within the Vatican's own walls, why has it never been spoken aloud? In the quiet hours of the Vatican Library, where the scent of old vellum and beeswax lingers in the air, there exists a small cabinet marked simply Exod VS. It contains manuscripts copied over centuries, some in Latin, others in Greek, Aramaic, and even medieval Arabic. Faded marginalia, penned by forgotten monks, hint at a secret that has eluded historians, theologians, and archaeologists alike. A question older than Christianity itself: where is the real Mount Sinai? For millennia, pilgrims have journeyed to the rugged peaks of the Sinai Peninsula, to St. Catherine's Monastery, nestled beneath a granite summit long revered as the site where Moses received the Ten Commandments. A place of awe, yes, but is it the right one? The biblical Mount Sinai, sometimes called Horeb, is one of the most significant locations in Judeo-Christian tradition. It was there, according to the book of Exodus, that God descended in fire and smoke. Thunder rolled, the mountain quaked, and atop this holy summit, Moses encountered a divine presence so powerful that even the people below trembled in fear. But here is the riddle. The Bible itself gives few clear geographic clues. It describes wilderness regions, Rephidim, Midian, the desert of Sin, but not coordinates. Early Jewish tradition placed the mountain vaguely in the south. By the time of Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, in the 4th century AD, the location we now know as Jebel Musa in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula was chosen, and a church erected in its shadow. Yet this designation was made over 2,000 years after the Exodus would have occurred, if it occurred at all. Was it chosen for its spiritual symbolism or its historical accuracy? Within the Vatican's own documents, doubt has always lingered. Several Renaissance-era maps produced under papal commission place Sinai far to the east, across the Gulf of Aqaba in what is now northwest Saudi Arabia. One such map, quietly removed from public view in the 18th century, labels a peak as Jabal al-Lawz, Mountain of Almonds, noting a curious phrase beneath it in Latin, locus tremoris et ignis, place of trembling and fire. Could it be that the Church, even then, suspected the traditional site was incorrect? In recent decades, a growing number of independent researchers have drawn attention to Jabal al-Lawz. This mountain, rising stark from the desert of ancient Midian, possesses a series of features that some argue align more closely with the biblical description than Egypt's Sinai Peninsula ever has. At the base of the mountain lie the ruins of what some claim to be ancient altars, stone circles, charred rocks, and petroglyphs that appear to depict bovines, reminiscent, perhaps, of the golden calf story. The summit itself is blackened, as if scorched by intense heat, standing in visual contrast to the rest of the range. Satellite images reveal trails and campsites in patterns oddly reminiscent of the wandering Israelites. Of course, mainstream archaeology remains skeptical. No formal excavation has been conducted under official Saudi auspices. No consensus exists on the dating of the stones or their connection to any biblical event. But still, the anomalies persist, and the Vatican remains silent. In 1984, a report surfaced, quickly withdrawn, that a team of Catholic scholars had been denied entry into the Jabal al-Lawz region. No explanation was given. Some speculate they had Vatican backing and were following up on older, unpublicized leads. Among the documents leaked was a memo referencing Liber Sancti Clementis, an obscure 10th century text that refers to the second mountain as the true Mons Domini, the mountain of the Lord. That text now resides in restricted holdings beneath the Archivum Secretum. Why would such a manuscript be suppressed? The question of Sinai's true location is not merely geographical. It's theological. If the mountain lies in Saudi Arabia, then the Exodus route must be reimagined entirely. The Red Sea crossing would need to be in the Gulf of Aqaba, not the Suez. The desert of Midian would take on new, historical weight, and the implications for interfaith dynamics, especially with Islam, which also reveres Moses, would be profound. Could it be that Vatican silence is not evidence of ignorance, but of preservation? And then there is the matter of tradition. The Church, for nearly 1,700 years, has upheld the sanctity of the Sinai Peninsula. St. Catherine's Monastery, the oldest continuously operating Christian monastery in the world, sits in quiet dignity beneath the accepted peak. It houses the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the oldest Bibles ever found. Pilgrims still ascend its slopes by torchlight. To cast doubt on the authenticity of that mountain would not only challenge geography, it would disturb the spiritual gravity of centuries. But perhaps that, too, is why questions remain unasked. Occasionally, hints surface in Vatican conferences and obscure theological journals. A paper delivered anonymously in the early 2000s referenced geographic misalignment in the sacred narrative. Another, more cautiously worded, explored the symbolic resonance of reinterpreted pilgrimage. But no official statement has been made. Are there documents hidden within the Vatican that confirm or refute the Jabal al-Lawz theory? Did the early Church have access to ancient maps or testimonies now lost to time? Or are the clues still buried in desert sands, waiting to be rediscovered? In the end, the mystery of Mount Sinai's true location remains unresolved. It is a convergence point between faith, history, and the unknown. The Vatican, guardian of centuries of knowledge, holds its silence, perhaps out of caution, perhaps out of reverence, or perhaps because what lies at the real mountain may not yet be ready to be revealed. If Mount Sinai, the site of divine law-giving, is not where we thought it was, then what else might we have misunderstood? And more importantly, who already knows? Beneath the soft golden dome of the Tower of the Winds, Torre dei Venti, hidden within the walls of the Vatican, there is a room that few ever enter. Built in the 16th century, this octagonal chamber holds an elaborate marble meridian line cut into its floor. As the sun passes through a small hole in the southern wall, a beam of light precisely crosses the line at noon on specific days of the year. Designed not merely as an architectural curiosity, this meridian was once one of the most accurate tools in Europe for measuring time, and ultimately for redefining it. But why would the Vatican, a spiritual authority, go to such great lengths to master the mechanics of celestial time? The story of timekeeping is often told through the lens of scientific advancement. From Egyptian water clocks to Galileo's pendulums, and from the Greenwich Prime Meridian to atomic clocks, it's portrayed as a march toward precision. But behind this tale lies another, quieter narrative, one in which religious power and temporal control have long been intertwined. For over 1,000 years, the Catholic Church was not only a spiritual compass, but also the regulator of time itself. The ringing of church bells marked the rhythms of daily life across medieval Europe. Liturgical calendars structured the seasons, and papal decrees dictated the very structure of the calendar we still use today. How did this authority come to be? And more curiously, has it ever truly been relinquished? In the late 16th century, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar, replacing the old Julian system that had been in place since the time of Julius Caesar. The change was not minor. By the 1500s, the Julian calendar had drifted out of sync with the solar year by nearly 10 days, creating theological headaches for determining Easter, which relied on the vernal equinox. With the help of Jesuit astronomers and mathematicians, the Vatican developed a correction that realigned the calendar with astronomical events. On October 4th, 1582, the world went to sleep and woke up on October 15th. 10 days were simply erased. Many countries resisted the change, suspicious of what they viewed as papal manipulation. Protestant nations like England didn't adopt the new calendar until 1752, but over time, the Gregorian system prevailed, becoming the civil calendar for nearly the entire world. Was this merely a scientific fix? Or was it something more? Some scholars argue that the calendar reform was part of a deeper effort by the Church to maintain its grip on historical and prophetic time. After all, time in Christian theology is not a neutral measurement, it is sacred. From the calculated date of creation to apocalyptic prophecies in Revelation, time is divine territory. Could it be then that the Vatican's interest in timekeeping was not just about days and hours, but about the power to define reality itself? Fragments of correspondence found in the Vatican Apostolic Archives reveal intriguing references to calendar reforms that were never enacted. One letter from the early 1700s refers cryptically to a second meridian line hidden within the papal apartments. Another speaks of temporum custodes, keepers of time, a title not recorded in any official hierarchy of the Church. Some fringe theorists claim that the Vatican possesses ancient knowledge of cyclical time, echoing traditions from the Maya, Hindu cosmology, or early Gnostic teachings. They suggest that certain events in human history are not linear but recur in patterns, and that the Church, through its control over calendars and liturgical time, has sought to obscure these cycles. One particularly persistent theory holds that a lost week exists in the calendar, an unrecorded period intentionally erased to conceal a prophetic alignment. The basis for this claim is thin, and mainstream historians dismiss it, but the Vatican has never publicly commented on it. Why would they? Then there is the matter of the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical institutions in the world. Founded in the 16th century and still active today, its telescopes scan the heavens from both Castel Gandolfo and Mount Graham in Arizona. Officially, the observatory supports research in planetary science and galactic evolution. But behind its scholarly facade, some observers question the depth of the Vatican's celestial interests. Why does the Church, so often viewed as separate from science, invest so deeply in the study of time and space? Is it merely a reflection of natural curiosity or a continuation of a much older quest? In 2013, a little-noticed symposium held within the Vatican discussed the ethics of time. Among the speakers was a theologian who suggested that humanity's perception of time has been shaped by centuries of ecclesiastical influence, not always consciously. His statement was not elaborated upon, and the session was not publicly recorded. Some have interpreted this as a subtle acknowledgement that time as we know it, its structure, its meaning, its direction, is not purely scientific, but in part theological. What then does the Vatican truly know about time? The Tower of the Winds still stands, quiet and mostly forgotten. Few modern visitors understand its function, or why Pope Gregory XIII had it built to test the equinox so precisely. Its gnomon still casts a line of light each year, right on time. But what if that light is not just a measure of the sun's position, but a reminder? A reminder that time itself is not neutral, that whoever defines it controls not just calendars, but culture, prophecy, and perhaps even destiny. What other temporal knowledge might still lie buried in the Vatican's sealed archives? And if time can be reshaped, who holds the key to reshaping it again? Hidden deep within the Apostolic Palace, past the Sala Regia and beneath the flickering golden frescoes of Renaissance triumph, lies a room not open to tourists or clergy. It is not marked on public maps. There are no official tours. Its doors, according to whispers among Vatican archivists, bear no name. Only a seal carved in cold stone, a crossed key motif above an inverted triangle. Behind this door, it is said, lie vaults of agreements, sealed, unsigned and forgotten by all but a few. Could the Vatican have entered into secret pacts with societies that exist outside, or perhaps beneath, the known world order? For centuries, the Vatican has served not only as a religious center, but as a diplomatic power unlike any other. Its sovereign status allows it to engage with nation-states as an independent entity, negotiating concordats or formal agreements that define the Church's rights and privileges within national borders. These concordats are typically public, meticulously detailed, and filed in both civil and ecclesiastical archives. But what if some weren't? What if, beyond the visible agreements with governments and monarchies, there exist other concordats, hidden ones, struck not with states but with societies whose names are spoken only in whispers? One of the oldest and most curious documents held within the Vatican Secret Archives, now officially renamed the Apostolic Archive, is a 17th century parchment known as Sub Umbra Foedis, or the Shadow Pact. Though never released in full, references to this document appear in the notes of Vatican librarians and were briefly discussed in a 1930s German theological journal, long since banned and removed from circulation. The content of the Foedus is elusive, but it allegedly describes a formal agreement between the Holy See and a non-territorial order operating outside civil jurisdiction. The language is deliberately vague, but who, or what, was this agreement made with? Some historians suggest it was a metaphorical reference to underground Christian sects operating in the Ottoman Empire or Imperial China. Others wonder whether the non-territorial order might refer to older, esoteric societies that predate even the Church itself, groups that have always operated beneath the surface of history. Among the candidates often cited are the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Knights of Malta, and even more obscure groups like the Prieuré de Sion, a semi-mythical order made famous in 20th century conspiracy lore. Most mainstream scholars dismiss these links as speculative fiction, and yet the question persists. Why does the Vatican maintain such strict secrecy over ancient agreements that no longer appear to serve any diplomatic purpose? Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, there were multiple unexplained shifts in Vatican policy and global alliances, shifts that some researchers argue cannot be fully understood through politics or theology alone. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty established Vatican City as an independent sovereign state, granting the Pope unprecedented autonomy. But less known is the rapid string of private meetings that occurred in the months before the treaty, involving not only Mussolini's emissaries but unidentified foreign visitors whose presence was never formally acknowledged. Some believe these were high-ranking members of elite European lodges, representatives of transnational societies with stakes in the Church's evolving role. Even stranger are rumors of a 1960s-era Midnight Concordat, said to have been signed in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, a moment of seismic transformation for the Church. While official records of the Council's proceedings are voluminous, there are noticeable gaps in the documentation of private side meetings. Whispers tell of agreements reached not only between bishops, but between Vatican officials and enigmatic figures representing groups with non-Christian cosmologies. Could the Church, in its bid to remain globally influential, have formed silent partnerships with organizations whose spiritual outlooks were never publicly compatible? Evidence is elusive, but tantalizing hints remain. A letter housed in the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, dated 1870 and signed by a Monsignor with ties to the Curia, refers to a covenant of the veiled meant to ensure uninterrupted spiritual stewardship across ages and transitions. The letter does not specify who the veiled are, but it suggests that they possess access to archives not of this world. Another trace appears in the writings of Cardinal Giacomo Antonelli, Secretary of State under Pope Pius XIX, who noted cryptically in his journal, "There are those whom we do not name, but with whom we must reckon. Their symbols are older than ours. What did he mean? Who were these unnamed entities? And what kind of negotiation could the Church, arguably the most powerful spiritual institution on earth, possibly need with them? Even in more recent years, some have pointed to the Vatican's peculiar silence on global fraternal orders whose philosophies occasionally brush against the Church's own teachings. While many popes have officially condemned Freemasonry and other secretive groups, private diplomatic records suggest back-channel communications continued long after such declarations. Why maintain such channels unless there was something unspoken beneath the surface, something not meant for public theology but for quiet coordination? There is, of course, no definitive proof of secret concordats with hidden societies, no signatures in wax, no treaties filed beneath St. Peter's Square. And yet, the pattern remains. Quiet alignments. Unexplained access. A persistent atmosphere of guarded collaboration with powers that seem to operate both within and beyond the known hierarchies of global influence. Could these be merely legends? Modern myths crafted from the fog of secrecy? Or are they glimpses of an enduring architecture of hidden agreements designed to ensure that spiritual authority remains intertwined with invisible hands? As the sun sets behind the colonnade of St. Peter's Basilica, casting long shadows across the marble, one cannot help but wonder. If the Vatican has, at any point in its long history, signed silent pacts with societies outside the world's view, then what was exchanged? And more importantly, what was promised? Beneath the Vatican Library, far below the quiet reading rooms and marble corridors that scholars roam by day, lie miles of underground shelving encased in climate-controlled chambers. Among the sealed boxes, leather-bound tomes, and aged scrolls, some documents are catalogued only by ciphered numbers, no titles, no author, no visible language. The precise contents of these shelves remain unknown to the public and to most of the clergy themselves. Only a select few archivists, sworn to absolute secrecy, are allowed entry. But within the conspiracy corridors of theological research, there are rumors. Whispers of one particular manuscript, a document whose very title sends a chill down the spine of traditional doctrine, the Gospel of Lucifer. Could such a text exist? And if so, what could it possibly contain? To begin, it is important to understand the gravity of such a claim. Lucifer, whose name in Latin means light-bringer, has for centuries been associated with the figure of Satan, the adversary, the fallen angel who rebelled against God. But this was not always the case. In the earliest Christian writings, especially during the first 3 centuries AD, the term Lucifer held a more complex, often ambiguous meaning. The name appears only once in most modern translations of the Bible, specifically in Isaiah 14:12. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" This passage, however, referred originally to a Babylonian king, not a spiritual entity. The association between Lucifer and Satan came later, shaped by centuries of interpretation, myth, and theological consolidation, much of it influenced by the writings of church fathers and medieval thinkers. But what if, in that hazy early period of Christian formation, other views about Lucifer were considered? Views now deemed heretical? In 1896, archaeologists in Upper Egypt discovered the Nag Hammadi codices, early Christian and Gnostic texts long hidden away, likely by monks trying to protect them from destruction. These texts shocked scholars. Among them were Gospels attributed to Thomas, Mary Magdalene, and Judas, alternative interpretations of Christ's message that challenged Orthodox theology. But according to one Vatican researcher who spoke anonymously in a 1987 German interview, now almost impossible to trace, there were other texts discovered in the late 19th century that never reached public scholarship. One of them, he claimed, bore a name translated roughly as Evangelium Luciferi, the Gospel of Lucifer. The source, though unverifiable, described a manuscript written in a pre-Latin script, possibly Aramaic or early Coptic, that presented Lucifer not as a tempter or a rebel, but as a misunderstood figure, an angel who offered humanity forbidden knowledge in an effort to awaken them spiritually. This idea mirrors certain Gnostic myths, such as the tale of Sophia and the Demiurge, in which divine beings are cast out for giving light to humanity. Could Lucifer, in this context, be a symbolic figure representing enlightenment rather than evil? Of course, mainstream church teachings reject such interpretations entirely. To accept Lucifer as anything but a fallen adversary is considered not only heretical, but dangerous. And yet, the Vatican's own history shows a long and complicated relationship with texts that challenge its narrative. During the Inquisition, books deemed heretical were systematically destroyed, but some, ironically, were preserved by the very institution that condemned them. Locked away, studied, but never released. Not out of reverence, but perhaps out of concern. In 1923, a Jesuit archivist reportedly wrote of a document secured from a French heretical sect containing inverted themes of Genesis and a gospel attributed to the light bearer. The document, he claimed, was written in mirrored Latin, possibly as a code, and contained allegories of creation from the perspective of the exiled. His notes mention a recurring phrase, lux et tenebris, light from darkness. Was this a symbolic literary exercise, an esoteric Gnostic metaphor, or something more dangerous? Further deepening the mystery is the fact that several prominent theologians who ventured into heterodox study of angelic hierarchies, such as the Renaissance philosopher Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and the occult-influenced scholar Athanasius Kircher, had restricted access to the Vatican library. Both hinted at misinterpreted messengers in their writings, and both were quietly discouraged by church authorities. Could their work have brushed against knowledge deemed too volatile for public theology? And what of the persistent rumor, circulating since the 1970s, that a small anonymous wing within the Vatican archives is labeled Classe Obscura, where texts of unknown origin are sealed in red wax? Among them, according to a now lost inventory list, is a single parchment titled Only L. Was this the so-called Gospel of Lucifer? To be clear, no such document has ever been authenticated, published, or directly referenced in official Vatican literature. Its existence is denied by church authorities. And yet, the silence on the subject is almost too complete. Why not simply debunk the claim outright? Why not allow scholars to verify the absence of such a manuscript? Why does this topic remain so rigidly off-limits, even in academic circles? If the gospel is fictional, the Vatican could easily say so. But if it exists, even as a Gnostic curiosity, could its contents truly be so disruptive that they must remain hidden? Perhaps the most chilling element of this mystery lies not in whether such a gospel exonerates Lucifer, but in what it might suggest about the structure of divine knowledge. Could there have been early Christian groups that viewed the story of the fall not as a tragedy but as a metaphor for illumination? Was humanity offered wisdom and punished for taking it? If so, who then is the villain of the story? The flickering candlelight of the Vatican's underground halls has illuminated many truths and hidden many more. For every gospel canonized, there are dozens excluded, sometimes without explanation. And for every figure cast in darkness, there may be another view, waiting to be unearthed. So we are left to wonder, if the gospel of Lucifer does exist, what knowledge does it contain? And why has it remained hidden for so long? What is the church protecting us from, or more hauntingly, itself from? Deep within the Apostolic Palace, beyond the frescoed ceilings and hallowed corridors walked by popes and cardinals, there is a room few ever enter. Unmarked, unassuming. It's neither a chapel nor a library, and yet what is discussed within its walls does not concern theology alone, but something far stranger. On the table lies a dossier. Yellowed pages, some handwritten in Latin, others stamped with modern digital codes. Each file bears a heading: Phenomenon Unexplainedus. Below it, terms emerge that sound more at home in science fiction than in religion: apparition, psychokinesis, bilocation, possession, not of demonic origin. Could it be that the Vatican, one of the world's oldest and most guarded religious institutions, has not only documented but actively funded research into the paranormal? The evidence, while subtle, suggests a quiet but consistent pattern stretching back centuries. In 1614, under Pope Paul V, the Roman ritual was formalized, including a section on exorcism, but tucked within that ritual were curious clauses, ones that didn't just address demonic entities, but referred vaguely to manifestations that do not answer to infernal names. What could such a phrase imply? By the 20th century, with the rise of modern science and the decline of belief in the supernatural across much of Europe, the Vatican found itself at a crossroads. Theology alone could not explain every strange occurrence brought to its attention. From reports of incorruptible bodies to inexplicable healings and Marian apparitions witnessed by thousands, the Church was faced with a question: were these divine signs frauds or something else? To explore such questions, it began to discreetly consult with scientists, psychologists, and even physicists. One such group, largely unknown to the public, is the Congregatio Pro Doctrina Fidei, formerly known as the Inquisition. While its primary role is doctrinal oversight, several former insiders have hinted that it also maintains a sub-office focused on non-theological anomalies. This group reportedly collaborates with Jesuit scholars trained not only in scripture, but also in quantum physics and anthropology. In hushed tones, some have called them the Vatican's ghost hunters. In 1999, a strange story emerged from Italy's Umbria region. A monastery reported nightly disturbances, strange sounds, flickering lights, and the sensation of being watched. The local bishop investigated, but what's most intriguing is that two priests arrived not from the diocese, but from Rome. One was a theologian. The other held a doctorate in neurobiology. Eyewitnesses described equipment being brought in: infrared cameras, audio recorders, and something resembling a Geiger counter. After 3 nights, the men departed. No report was ever made public. The monastery closed within a year. Was this an isolated case? Not entirely. In Argentina, a young seminarian turned investigator named Father Manuel Carvalho documented dozens of paranormal events in the 1970s, ranging from poltergeist activity in orphanages to unexplained voices heard in empty churches. In his private notes, later leaked by a fellow priest, Carvalho claimed he was funded directly through a Roman Curia auxiliary fund for exceptional phenomena. The idea that the Vatican might finance paranormal investigation may sound improbable. But consider this: the Church has long maintained that miracles, before being declared authentic, must undergo scientific scrutiny. This includes everything from medical healings to Marian apparitions like those in Fatima or Lourdes. In the case of Fatima, the Vatican sent astronomers, linguists, and psychologists well beyond what would be required to assess a simple religious claim. Reports from the 1917 miracle describe the sun dancing, witnessed by over 70,000 people. Was it mass hysteria, a celestial anomaly, or something else? Why bring in specialists trained in atmospheric physics? In the archives of the Pontifical Gregorian University, founded in 1551 by Jesuits, there exists an unpublished thesis titled Transcendent Manifestations and Neural Perception. Authored in the 1980s, it reportedly combines theological doctrine with case studies of phenomena typically labeled as hauntings or paranormal events. The thesis draws eerie parallels between mystical experiences of saints, such as Saint Teresa of Avila's levitations, and modern accounts of spontaneous psychokinetic episodes. Could both be expressions of the same unknown force? This question leads some to wonder whether the Church, rather than denying the paranormal, has quietly sought to classify it, understand it, and most crucially, control its narrative. Not all accounts come from within church circles. In 2002, a retired Italian intelligence officer claimed in a radio interview that the Vatican maintains a mobile investigative unit comprised of clergy trained in both theology and parapsychology. While no documentation has verified this, a similar idea was echoed in a 2015 academic paper discussing how religious institutions approach unexplained phenomena in rural communities. It's worth noting that the Vatican Observatory, founded in the 16th century and one of the oldest astronomical research centers in the world, maintains facilities not only in Italy, but in Arizona. Its astronomers have studied celestial anomalies, time distortions near certain magnetic fields, and even published on the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Is it so far-fetched to imagine that the same institution would seek to understand terrestrial anomalies as well? More recently, in 2021, a priest in Slovakia published an article in a theological journal hinting at unacknowledged Vatican inquiries into interdimensional encounters. The phrase raised eyebrows and was quietly removed from the digital version a week later. Could this have been a misstatement, or something more revealing than intended? The Vatican, by nature, moves slowly. It rarely comments on rumors and almost never acknowledges internal investigations, especially those touching the supernatural. But silence is not the same as denial. And if even a fraction of these whispered reports are true, then the Catholic Church, so often perceived as the guardian of orthodoxy, may have been quietly engaging with the paranormal all along, not to sensationalize it, but to study it, to catalog it, and perhaps to shield the faithful from truths that defy both science and Scripture. Which brings us to a final, lingering question. If the Vatican truly has its own investigators, trained, equipped, and dispatched to study the unexplained, what have they found that the world is not yet ready to hear? And more importantly, why keep it hidden? Hidden deep in the Vatican Apostolic Archive, behind temperature-controlled vaults, beneath layers of stone and silence, there exists a room known only to a select few archivists. The chamber is lit dimly, not by fluorescent fixtures, but by soft amber lamps whose light casts long shadows across shelves of leather-bound tomes. One shelf, slightly dustier than the others, holds a collection of texts categorized under Genealogia Antiqua, ancient genealogies. Among them is a volume written not in Latin but in a much older Semitic script. Faded, yet painstakingly preserved, it is known simply as Liber Sanguinis, the Book of Blood. Its contents have never been made public, but a few scholars, permitted brief access under ecclesiastical oath, have whispered of its subject. Cain, the firstborn of Adam and Eve, the one who slew his brother, Abel, the first murderer, and possibly the father of a bloodline erased from memory, but not from history. What happened to Cain after his exile? The book of Genesis tells us he was cast eastward into the land of Nod. There, he built a city and fathered descendants. And then, nothing. The narrative shifts, and Cain vanishes from the pages of Scripture as quietly as he entered them. But does his lineage truly end there? The question of Cain's bloodline has fascinated biblical scholars, mystics, and theologians for centuries. Medieval rabbinic commentaries and early Christian apocrypha mention strange descendants, beings with peculiar traits, great strength, or uncanny wisdom. Others speak of a mark that set Cain apart, not as punishment, but as preservation. What was this mark? In mainstream Christian thought, it was symbolic, a divine sign to prevent others from killing Cain. But alternative readings, particularly among early Gnostic sects, viewed it differently. They described the mark as something genetic, something passed down. Could the Vatican possess ancient texts that trace Cain's line, not just metaphorically, but biologically? Some researchers point to obscure medieval manuscripts, hidden within Vatican collections, that link Cain to a group of proto-nations in the ancient Near East. These documents hint that Cain's children mingled with other tribes, establishing dynasties shrouded in secrecy. The descendants were not always outcasts. In some accounts, they were kings and priests. Others see echoes of Cain's story in Mesopotamian myths, the tale of Enkidu, the wild man, or the Sumerian accounts of divine bloodlines descending from star beings. Could these stories be cultural memories of an ancient lineage, one both exalted and cursed? In the early 20th century, a Jesuit linguist named Father Augustin Crocetta was tasked with translating a rare Syriac codex, believed to be one of the earliest Christian texts written outside the Roman sphere. In a private letter, now archived in the Vatican Library, he described encountering references to the Watchers who intermarried with the sons of Cain, producing a line of hybrid beings, clever, long-lived, and strange to behold. These descriptions mirror the apocryphal Book of Enoch, which speaks of angels descending to earth and taking human wives, creating the Nephilim, a race of giants, men of renown. Mainstream theology rejects this interpretation as metaphorical, but the consistent appearance of such motifs across Enochian texts, ancient Mesopotamian myths, and even early Islamic writings has led some to reconsider. Was Cain's bloodline simply human, or something else? Adding to the mystery is the curious absence of Cain's descendants in the genealogical records of Genesis after the flood. Noah, the survivor of the deluge, descends not from Cain, but from Seth, Adam and Eve's third son. Does this mean the line of Cain was destroyed entirely? Or were they preserved, hidden, scattered beyond the boundaries of biblical record? Some Vatican scholars in the 18th century believed that Cain's line had not been wiped out, but had gone underground, quite literally. An 1803 document titled De Genere Obscuro, on the obscure lineage, speaks of people who dwell in the shadow of history, whose names have been erased, but whose influence remains. Even stranger are the legends that arise in rural Europe, tales of old blood families who avoid churches, who speak dead languages, and who, according to whispered folklore, are descended from Cain himself. How seriously does the Vatican take these stories? Well into the 1950s, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith maintained an office dedicated to monitoring heretical genealogies. Though its work was officially discontinued in the wake of Vatican II, internal records suggest that the topic of Cain's descendants remained a quiet concern. In one declassified note from 1958, an unnamed cardinal wrote, "We do not fear the return of Cain, but the knowledge of his survival." There are also theological implications. If Cain's bloodline survived, hidden, watching, what does that mean for original sin, for divine judgment, and for the Church's understanding of humanity itself? Are there those walking among us who carry a different inheritance, one not entirely reconciled with the story of redemption? In the fringes of speculative theology, some propose that Cain's bloodline may not represent evil in a traditional sense, but a divergent path of knowledge, one condemned by God not for its wickedness, but for its defiance. The apocryphal Gospel of Judas makes a similar suggestion, that betrayal can be divine if it serves a higher truth. Could Cain, the first exile, be the father not of monsters, but of secret keepers? For now, the Vatican remains silent. It does not confirm or deny possession of genealogical texts related to Cain. It does not release its restricted apocrypha. And yet, it preserves them. So we are left only with questions. Why is Cain's line omitted from post-flood scripture? Why do so many ancient traditions echo the same strange story? That he had descendants who were set apart, marked and hidden. And if Cain's bloodline does continue, where are they now? Are they lost to time? Or are they watching from the margins, waiting, unseen, unknown, and perhaps unacknowledged even by the Church that holds the oldest records of them all? In the hush of the Vatican Library, beneath the soaring vaults and ancient Latin inscriptions, rests a modest alcove rarely visited by the public. Its stone walls cradle tall wooden shelves, each lined with manuscripts bound in faded vellum. Behind glass cases lie sacred texts, the earliest Latin Vulgates, fragments of the Greek Septuagint, Aramaic scrolls, and rare codices penned in Syriac, Coptic, and Hebrew. The air here is tinged with the scent of ancient ink and dust, an atmosphere of reverence and secrets. For centuries, this archive has been the resting place of some of the earliest translations of the Bible. And for some, it is here, in the quiet between these pages, that the first shadows of an enduring mystery emerge. Why do certain key biblical phrases appear differently from one translation to another? What words were altered, softened, or obscured over time, and why? The translation of Scripture has never been a neutral task. From the earliest centuries of the Christian era, scribes, monks, and theologians were faced with difficult decisions: how to carry words across languages without losing meaning, or introducing new meanings altogether. Take, for instance, the Hebrew word Nephilim found in Genesis 6:4. In its original form, it suggests fallen ones, often interpreted as giants or hybrid beings. Yet in many versions, including the Latin Vulgate, the King James Bible, and subsequent translations, the word is rendered ambiguously, sometimes as giants, sometimes as heroes of old. What was lost or hidden in this linguistic shift? Some scholars argue that translation discrepancies are simply the byproduct of evolving language. Others, however, point to more deliberate choices. In the 4th century AD, Saint Jerome was commissioned by Pope Damasus I to translate the Bible into Latin, a monumental task that became the Vulgate. While Jerome worked diligently from Hebrew and Greek sources, he also made certain interpretive choices that would shape Christian theology for centuries. One of the most debated is his rendering of the Hebrew word Alma, used in Isaiah 7:14. The term traditionally means young woman. But Jerome translated it as Virgo, virgin, thereby transforming the prophecy into a cornerstone of Christian belief, the virgin birth of Jesus. Was this a genuine translation decision or a theological correction? Even more puzzling are the omissions noted in certain texts. The Codex Sinaiticus, one of the oldest surviving Bibles, lacks several verses found in later versions. Mark 16:9-20, the so-called long ending describing Jesus' resurrection appearances, is absent from many early manuscripts. So is the story of the adulterous woman, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," which appears in the Gospel of John but is missing in some of the oldest Greek copies. Were these passages later additions? And if so, who added them, and why? The Vatican has long maintained strict control over biblical canon, declaring which books are divinely inspired and which are apocryphal. But the process of canonization itself, formalized in various church councils between the 4th and 16th centuries, was as much political as it was spiritual. Books such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Enoch, and the Shepherd of Hermas were widely read by early Christians, yet later deemed unworthy of inclusion. Their absence has raised questions for generations. Were these writings excluded because they contradicted orthodoxy, or because they revealed truths too difficult or dangerous to embrace? One fragment preserved in the Vatican Library, written in early Sahidic Coptic, contains a passage from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. In it, Mary describes visions and teachings of Jesus not found anywhere in the 4 canonical Gospels. The Vatican does not deny the manuscript's existence, but it does not recognize its authority. What if the truth lies not just in what was written, but in what was rewritten? In more recent times, scholars have uncovered subtle variations across global editions of the Bible. In the Douay Rheims Bible, an English translation of the Latin Vulgate endorsed by the Catholic Church, certain passages emphasize the hierarchical role of the clergy more strongly than in Protestant versions. Ephesians 5:22, for instance, varies in tone depending on translation, shifting the balance of spiritual authority within family and church. In some cases, entire verses appear in one Bible but are bracketed, footnoted, or absent in another. These variations may seem minor, but over time, they shape beliefs, policies, and even laws. Who decides which version is most faithful, and which meaning is most divine? Even the very name of God has been subject to shifting interpretation. In the original Hebrew scriptures, the divine name, YHWH, is written without vowels, shrouded in mystery and reverence. Later, Christian translations render it as the Lord, while others use Jehovah or Yahweh. But the truth is, no one knows for certain how it was meant to be spoken, or if it ever was. Was the name altered deliberately to protect it, or to conceal something deeper? In the mid-20th century, as archaeologists uncovered the Dead Sea Scrolls near Qumran, scholars began comparing those ancient manuscripts with traditional biblical texts. The scrolls revealed early versions of Scripture, in some cases predating the Canon by centuries. And while most of the content aligned with known texts, subtle and sometimes startling differences emerged. Certain psalms found in Qumran have no counterpart in modern Bibles. Variants of the Book of Isaiah included slightly different phrasing, alterations that, while small, could have large theological implications. Was this evolution natural or curated? And does the Vatican possess other manuscripts, older, more complete, that it chooses not to reveal? This is not to suggest a deliberate conspiracy. Translation is inherently interpretive. Language changes. Meanings evolve. But even within that truth lies an unsettling question. How much of the Bible we read today reflects the original voice of its authors? And how much has been shaped by centuries of revision, reinterpretation, and omission? In the Vatican's deepest archives, under the care of silent librarians and guarded corridors, sit scrolls and codices written in the first centuries after Christ, fragments that may tell a slightly different story, or perhaps a fuller one. What would those words say, if we could read them now? And perhaps more importantly, why have we not been allowed to? In a shadowed chapel on the outskirts of San Giovanni Rotondo, the soft flicker of candlelight dances against the glass of a reliquary. Inside rests a worn glove, stained dark around the palms. It once belonged to Padre Pio, a 20th century Capuchin friar, mystic and stigmatic. For decades, the faithful claimed that he bore the wounds of Christ, bleeding from his hands, feet, and side without cause or cure. Pilgrims still flocked to this chapel, kneeling in awe before a man who reportedly lived in constant, holy suffering. But for all the reverence, questions persist. Were these wounds divine, psychosomatic, or, perhaps most controversially, self-inflicted? And more intriguingly, why has the Vatican, for over a century, remained conspicuously quiet on the growing allegations of stigmata hoaxes? Stigmata, in Catholic tradition, refers to bodily wounds that mimic the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The phenomenon has been reported since the 13th century, with the first recorded case attributed to Saint Francis of Assisi in 1224. According to hagiographic accounts, he received the marks after a profound vision of a seraph on Mount Laverna. Since then, over 300 cases of stigmata have been documented, mostly involving devout Catholics, many of them women, often secluded mystics. The pattern is eerily consistent: bleeding from the hands, feet, side, and occasionally the head, mimicking the crown of thorns. The Church, for its part, has historically taken a cautious stance, neither rushing to authenticate nor actively debunk. Some stigmatics have been canonized, others quietly dismissed, but in nearly every case, the Vatican's official position has been silence. Why? In the modern era, scrutiny has only intensified. With the rise of medical diagnostics, photography, and journalistic inquiry, some cases once considered miraculous began to unravel under investigation. In 1919, Therese Neumann of Bavaria claimed to bleed profusely during ecstatic trances. Skeptics noted that her wounds appeared precisely during moments when she was alone. Her physicians were barred from thorough examinations. Independent observers found inconsistencies, and yet Rome never issued a formal judgment. Then came Magdalene de la Cruz, a 16th-century Spanish nun revered as a living saint. Her stigmata and prophetic visions were celebrated across Europe, until on her deathbed she confessed to decades of deception. Her wounds, she admitted, were self-inflicted. Her ecstasies, rehearsed. The scandal was immense, but it quickly faded from official church memory. Why was no statement issued? Why were her fraudulent claims quietly buried, rather than held up as a warning? Even the case of Padre Pio, the most famous stigmatic of the 20th century, remains unresolved in key ways. Though canonized in 2002, Vatican documents from earlier decades tell a more conflicted story. Internal investigations once accused him of using carbolic acid to create and maintain his wounds. Letters suggest he was supplied with the chemical by a pharmacist acquaintance. At various points, he was silenced, his public ministry restricted. And yet, the narrative changed. The doubts were set aside. What happened behind closed doors? A deeper mystery emerges when one examines how selectively the Vatican has responded to stigmata cases. Some, like Francis of Assisi, are held up as models of sanctity. Others are simply left out of the record. For instance, in the early 20th century, an Italian woman named Gemma Galgani displayed signs of stigmata, levitation, and prophecy. Local clergy reported her visions in great detail. But Vatican theologians quietly concluded there was no miracle, and her case was shelved for decades. She was eventually canonized, but without reference to her more controversial mystical phenomena. Could the Church be walking a tightrope between belief and embarrassment? Modern science offers numerous explanations for stigmata. Psychogenic purpura, a rare autoimmune condition, can cause spontaneous bruising and bleeding under stress. Dissociative states can lead individuals to harm themselves without conscious awareness. In extreme cases, religious ecstasy can manifest physically: blisters, sores, even ulcerations. Some researchers propose that intense focus on the Passion of Christ, especially in deeply suggestible or psychologically vulnerable individuals, may produce real wounds via a mechanism known as somatization. In other words, belief so strong it bleeds into the body. But these explanations, however plausible, remain theories, and they do not account for the consistency of certain patterns, the symmetrical wounds, The timing with religious holidays, the lack of infection despite open sores. Could there be something more? There is also the darker theory that some stigmatics knowingly manipulated their followers. In the 18th and 19th centuries, certain religious communities treated stigmatics as signs of divine favor. Donations flowed, convents gained prestige, individuals rose in ecclesiastical rank. Was there motive for deception? The Vatican archives may hold answers. For years, reports of stigmata investigations have been filed within the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, formerly known as the Roman Inquisition. These files are not publicly available. Access is restricted. No official catalog exists. What would we learn if these records were opened? The mystery deepens when one considers how carefully the Vatican differentiates between miracle and myth. For a stigmata case to be officially recognized, it must undergo exhaustive examination, medical reviews, psychological profiling, witness testimonies. Yet many cases are quietly ignored, neither confirmed nor condemned. Could it be that the Church prefers ambiguity? That the silence protects the faithful from scandal, or the institution from shame? And if deliberate hoaxes are known, why allow them to persist in popular devotion? The story of stigmata lies at the intersection of faith, psychology, and pain. Whether divine marks or human wounds, they speak to a longing to feel closer to Christ, to suffer as he did, and in doing so, find meaning. For some, that suffering is real. For others, perhaps it is carefully staged. But in every case, the Vatican's silence remains, a silence that allows belief to flourish and doubt to fester. So we are left to wonder, how many of these wounds were truly miraculous, and how many perhaps were hidden behind the veil of holy mystery, never to be questioned again? In a quiet corner of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, behind glass and beneath dim museum lighting, rests a dark, jagged object. A slender iron spearhead mounted on a gold-trimmed shaft, worn by time and myth alike. Its surface is rough, almost crude, marked with the scars of centuries. To most, it might seem like nothing more than a relic of medieval warfare. But to some, this is no ordinary weapon. This, they claim, is the spear of destiny, the very lance that pierced the side of Jesus Christ as he hung from the cross. It is said that whoever possesses this spear holds the fate of the world in their hands. Kings have killed for it. Dictators have sought it. And yet, after centuries of obsession, pilgrimage, and war, one question remains. Is the spear in Vienna the true relic? Or has the real spear of destiny been hidden away, perhaps in the most secretive vaults of the Vatican itself? The tale begins in the Gospel of John. As the crucified Jesus hangs lifeless on the cross, a Roman soldier, often identified in Christian tradition as Longinus, thrusts a spear into his side. Blood and water pour out, a moment later imbued with deep theological symbolism. But the weapon itself is not mentioned again in Scripture. It is only later, in the apocryphal texts and medieval legends, that the object begins to take on mythic proportions. By the 8th century, the spear is referenced as a sacred relic. By the 10th, emperors are carrying it into battle. And by the time of the First Crusade, it is said to possess divine powers, offering victory, legitimacy, and divine favor to its wielder. But as with many sacred artifacts, there is not just one spear. There are three. The most famous of these lies in Vienna, in the imperial treasury of the Habsburgs. It was long believed to be the lance of Constantine, passed down through the Holy Roman Emperors. It eventually fell into the hands of Napoleon's enemies, then into Hitler's possession in 1938 when Nazi forces annexed Austria. Adolf Hitler, obsessed with esoteric symbolism, reportedly believed the spear held supernatural power. Upon securing it, he transferred it to Nuremberg. In a twist of history, U.S. forces captured the spear just hours after Hitler's death in 1945. Was this coincidence? Or something more? And if Hitler truly believed in the spear's power, did he possess the real one? The second contender rests in the Vatican, or rather, allegedly does. For while it is occasionally referenced in obscure inventories and devotional texts, the Vatican has never officially confirmed its possession of any spear of destiny. According to a 13th century Armenian manuscript and several Byzantine sources, the spearhead was brought to Constantinople before being transferred to Rome after the Fourth Crusade. Some scholars suggest it was quietly housed in the Basilica of St. Peter, then moved to the Vatican's private reliquary collection. A small sliver of iron, said to be part of the tip of the lance, is enshrined in St. Peter's Basilica to this day, but the Church does not formally recognize it as the true relic. Why such ambiguity? If the Vatican holds the original, why remain silent? The third spear lies in Etchmiadzin, Armenia. Preserved in a small museum adjacent to the country's most ancient cathedral, the Armenian Church claims this lance was brought from Jerusalem by the Apostle Thaddeus in the 1st century A.D. It has been revered there for over 1,700 years. But metallurgical testing suggests this spearhead may be from a later period. Its design is inconsistent with Roman military gear from the 1st century. And yet, the locals maintain its authenticity, trusting in an unbroken line of sacred guardianship. So which, if any, is the real spear? Or is it possible none are? Modern analysis has been inconclusive. The Vienna spear, examined in 2003, was dated to around the 7th century, too late for the time of Christ. However, some argue the spear could have been reworked over time, repaired or embellished as it passed through royal hands. Its core may still hold ancient iron, but it is the Vatican's version that draws the most speculation. There are whispers among scholars, quiet, unproven, and always denied, that the Vatican may hold a version of the spear not available to public view. That within the deep subterranean vaults beneath the Apostolic Palace, behind sealed doors and coded catalogs, there lies a relic too powerful or too dangerous to reveal. The Vatican Secret Archives, now partially renamed the Apostolic Archive, contains thousands of unreleased manuscripts, sealed documents, and classified relic lists. Some believe among these there exists a ledger or a forgotten codex, confirming the true resting place of the Spear of Destiny. If such a document exists, why has it never surfaced? And what consequences would follow its revelation? Fringe theorists push the mystery even further. Some claim that the spear was spirited away during the chaos of World War II, hidden by esoteric brotherhoods or occult sects. Others insist that the real spear is not made of iron at all, but of some unknown alloy, passed down from pre-Christian times, even linked to ancient Mesopotamian or Atlantean myths. A few connect the spear to the Ark of the Covenant, or the Holy Grail, suggesting all three may be part of a larger divine mechanism, scattered and protected to prevent misuse. To them, the Vatican's silence isn't mere caution, but part of a centuries-long guardianship. Too far-fetched? Perhaps. Yet, the mystery endures. One fact remains. No definitive provenance has been established for any of the known spears. No chain of custody goes back to the crucifixion itself. And yet, the allure of the Spear of Destiny persists, its story woven into the fabric of Western faith, warfare, and myth. Why does this object, simple and small, evoke such fascination? Is it the power it promises, the legends it carries, or the silence that surrounds it? And if the real spear still exists, hidden in a vault, guarded in secret, its truth too potent to unveil, what might it still mean for the world? What destiny might it hold? Beneath the echoing marble domes of the Vatican Library, Past high-arched shelves lined with centuries-old parchment lies a chamber few have seen. Its air is thick with silence, broken only by the gentle flutter of turning vellum or the soft footfall of a scholar moving among the stacks. Among the tens of thousands of documents housed here, some open to study, many still restricted, there are whispered rumors of accounts that do not describe saints or emperors, but something stranger. Not angels, not demons, but something else. Encounters that defy the known categories of religious tradition and challenge the very boundaries of reality as we understand it. These reports, some claim, point not to beings from heaven or hell, but from dimensions beyond our own. Could it be that the Vatican has quietly collected, and perhaps concealed, evidence of contact with interdimensional entities? Throughout history, encounters with non-human intelligences have been interpreted through the lens of culture and belief. In ancient Judea, strange visitations might have been seen as angelic manifestations. In medieval Europe, they could be labeled as demonic temptations or miraculous apparitions. But as our understanding of science, space, and time has evolved, so too have the interpretations. In the 20th and 21st centuries, a growing number of theologians, physicists, and even some within the Church have begun to ask, what if some of these entities do not come from distant planets, but from alternate realms? Worlds parallel to our own, layered like invisible pages in a divine manuscript. This idea, once the province of mystics and visionaries, is now being echoed by some in the world of theoretical physics. Concepts such as string theory, brain cosmology, and multidimensional space suggest that our universe may be just one of many, and if so, who or what might inhabit these adjacent dimensions? One of the most intriguing connections comes from a 16th century manuscript held in the Vatican Library's Codices collection. In it, a monk named Brother Bartolomeo recounts a vision he experienced in the catacombs beneath Rome. He describes men of light who moved without sound, communicated without words, and appeared to pass through walls as if they were mist. These figures, he notes, neither blessed nor cursed him. They offered no message of salvation or warning. Instead, they studied him, observed him, and then vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The account was filed away, neither condemned nor canonized. Was it a hallucination, a parable, or something else entirely? Fast forward to the late 20th century, Father Corrado Balducci, a respected theologian and longtime member of the Vatican Curia, stunned many in 2000 when he spoke openly on Italian television about non-human intelligences. Not all encounters, he suggested, fit easily into our traditional categories. While Balducci was often mischaracterized as an advocate for extraterrestrial contact, his actual position was more nuanced. He proposed the possibility that some phenomena, particularly those reported by deeply spiritual individuals, might be encounters with beings from another reality. Entities that do not reside in heaven or space as we understand it, but in a plane that touches ours only at rare, mysterious moments. Were these interdimensional beings, spirits, messengers? The Church did not rebuke Balducci, nor did it clarify his remarks. Why such ambiguity? In the 1970s, a Vatican-affiliated observatory atop Mount Graham in Arizona, an institution publicly tasked with astronomical research, became the center of speculation. It was not only the scientific equipment that drew attention, but the secrecy that surrounded certain observations. The observatory's involvement with the Large Binocular Telescope and an infrared instrument informally nicknamed Lucifer sparked theories far beyond the academic. Some independent researchers claimed that the Vatican was quietly monitoring unusual phenomena, shifts in light spectra, unexplained heat signatures, or objects that did not conform to natural patterns. Were these mere scientific anomalies, or subtle clues to realities beyond our own? And why would a religious institution invest so heavily in scanning the heavens? or what might lie between. Accounts have continued into the modern era. In 2009, a confidential letter, allegedly leaked from within the Roman Curia, described a private Vatican inquiry into recurring visions experienced by a cloistered nun in Umbria. Her descriptions were not of Christ or the Virgin Mary, but of a curtain of light beyond which shapes moved like thoughts taking form. She described the figures as neither beautiful nor terrifying, only unfamiliar. They carried no emotion, she wrote, but a gravity of presence, as if their awareness was older than ours. The investigation's findings were never made public. The nun was relocated, and her writings, according to reports, were transferred to the Vatican archives. To this day, their contents remain inaccessible. Of course, mainstream scholars within the Church urge caution. The majority of these claims, they argue, are symbolic visions or misunderstood spiritual experiences. The language of mysticism is, by its nature, metaphorical. Not every mystery demands a scientific explanation. And yet, some voices within the Vatican suggest there is room, perhaps even necessity, for deeper inquiry. Could it be that the spiritual and the scientific are not at odds, but are two lenses viewing the same mystery from different angles? As our understanding of the cosmos deepens, so too does our awareness of its complexity. If dimensions beyond our own exist, and if they touch our world in subtle, momentary ways, what might live within them? Are these beings ancient guardians, cosmic travelers, or reflections of ourselves, cast through a prism of higher understanding? More importantly, what does the Vatican know? Is the silence protective or withholding? Are these encounters sacred mysteries, dangerous truths, or something that transcends both? And as more questions rise from the shadows of time, one wonders, how many of these stories lie buried not in legend, but in locked drawers beneath St. Peter's dome, awaiting a world willing to listen? Beneath the cobbled courtyards and sun-warmed stone of Vatican City, there is a world that few have ever seen, a labyrinth of narrow passageways, hidden vaults, and shadowed corridors carved deep into the Roman soil. These tunnels, some say, predate even the Renaissance Basilica that towers above them. Others insist they were expanded during times of crisis, times when the eyes of the world were fixed not on heaven, but on the Cold War's simmering brink. Their walls, rough and cool to the touch, seem to carry secrets in their silence. Faint echoes hint at stories untold. Flickering electric bulbs illuminate paths that veer into darkness, as if guiding or guarding something important. But what purpose did these tunnels serve during one of the most dangerous geopolitical eras in modern history? What might still lie hidden below? It is no secret that the Vatican has long maintained underground spaces. Crypts beneath St. Peter's Basilica hold the tombs of popes dating back centuries. Storage vaults protect irreplaceable manuscripts from fire, light, and theft. The famous Vatican necropolis, rediscovered in the 1940s, offers a glimpse into early Christian Rome, resting beneath layers of later construction. But beginning in the late 1940s, as tensions rose between the United States and the Soviet Union, stories emerged of new activity below the Vatican's foundations. Whispers circulated among diplomatic circles, tunnel reinforcements, new passageways, sealed chambers. Construction workers spoke, often anonymously, of sudden orders to leave sites mid-task, tools still in hand. In 1951, a journalist from L'Osservatore Romano reportedly investigated noises coming from beneath a wing of the Apostolic Palace during the early morning hours. What he found was never published. The article was pulled before it went to print. The Vatican offered no comment. As the Cold War escalated, the Vatican's unique position became more than symbolic. Nestled in the heart of Rome, yet sovereign and politically neutral, It was both connected to and insulated from Western and Eastern powers alike. With diplomatic ties to Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, the Holy See became an unexpected yet strategic conduit of information. Could it be that the Vatican's underground network played a role in this quiet diplomacy? Declassified documents from U.S. intelligence agencies hint at unusual activities during the papacy of Pius XII. One memo, dated 1955, refers obliquely to secure ecclesiastical channels operating under the city. Another, from the early 1960s, speculates that non-radio communication methods were being employed by Vatican operatives in Rome, bypassing standard surveillance protocols. What might these cryptic phrases mean? Some historians suggest that the tunnels were repurposed for Cold War security. In the event of nuclear attack, or even political unrest, the Pope and senior clergy would need discreet escape routes or protected shelters. This would be consistent with similar constructions across Europe and North America, where world leaders had access to hidden bunkers and exit corridors. But others point to more covert possibilities. During the 1980s, Italian newspapers reported sightings of plainclothes individuals entering subterranean entrances beneath the Vatican gardens at odd hours. Some wore no insignia. Others were seen in brief but tense exchanges with Swiss guards, unusual given the guards' standard focus on ceremonial duties. These entrances were not marked on any official maps. A few years later, in 1992, a retired Vatican archivist claimed in a private interview that select passages below the Apostolic Library had been outfitted with what he described as communication relay points, equipment, he said, that did not belong to the Church. He died 3 months later. No documentation has surfaced to confirm or deny his claims. Adding to the mystery is the sudden closure of certain underground sections in the 1960s. Public access to parts of the necropolis was suspended without explanation. The reason cited was renovation, a term often used by governments to mask sensitive operations. Vatican staff who had previously guided archaeologists through the area were reassigned or dismissed. Some were bound to new confidentiality agreements. Could something else have been discovered or installed beneath the Vatican? And if so, who was it for? More speculative theories suggest even deeper functions. Some propose that the Vatican tunnels were used to smuggle persecuted clergy and political refugees out of Eastern Bloc countries via an intricate network of religious institutions across Europe. Others believe the underground corridors served as secret meeting sites for Cold War intermediaries, diplomats, spies, even defectors. One persistent rumor involves a Cold War summit held not in Geneva or Moscow, but far beneath St. Peter's Basilica in 1963. According to fringe accounts, high-level envoys from both NATO and the Warsaw Pact allegedly met there under the Church's mediation. No photographs, records, or official confirmations exist. But the sudden shift in Vatican rhetoric toward peaceful coexistence during that same year has raised eyebrows among scholars. Coincidence? Or a calculated result of shadow diplomacy? And then there is the most provocative question of all. What if the Cold War tunnels were not just for escape or strategy, but for containment? Could certain areas beneath the Vatican be closed not to protect them from the world, but to protect the world from something within? Reports, uncorroborated but recurring, speak of heavily locked chambers no longer in use, monitored by silent guards, of corridors that lead to walls that should not be there, of strange symbols carved into the oldest stones, worn by time but still legible to those who know what to look for. Even in modern times, Vatican officials remain tight-lipped. Inquiries into the full extent of the underground system are politely declined. Maps are incomplete. Tours, when allowed, follow strictly controlled routes. And rumors, when they surface, are neither confirmed nor denied. In the quiet beneath St. Peter's Dome, one can still feel it. The weight of time, the hush of secrets, the breath of 1,000 years echoing off stone. Were these tunnels simply Cold War logistics? Or did they serve a deeper, stranger purpose? Are they forgotten relics of a bygone age? Or still active arteries in the hidden body of global power? And if walls could speak, what would they say about the Vatican's place, not just in spiritual history, but in the shadows of our modern world? High above the bustling streets of Rome, the Vatican's apostolic palace rises like a fortress of stone and silence. But beneath the gold-embossed ceilings, behind frescoed halls and the watchful eyes of Swiss guards, exists a room few ever enter. It is not adorned like the others. It is dimly lit, lined with steel file cabinets and thick concrete walls. At the center, a heavy iron door, rumored to require 2 keys, each held by a different cardinal. Inside, according to speculation, lies a single dossier sealed with red wax. Its title is not officially known, but those who claim to have seen it refer to it by one name: the Doomsday Protocol. For centuries, the Vatican has weathered invasions, revolutions, plagues, and world wars. But the 20th century introduced an entirely new kind of threat: instantaneous, global, and final. The atomic age forced every world power to prepare for the unthinkable: nuclear annihilation. But while secular nations publicly debated strategy and survival, the Vatican remained silent. Did the Church, arguably the most enduring institution in Western civilization, have its own plan for the end of the world? Some believe it did, or does. Verified historical records confirm that by the early 1960s, the Vatican had established private channels of communication with several nuclear powers. Papal envoys traveled discreetly between Moscow, Washington, and Paris, not just for peace diplomacy, but, according to some intelligence memos, to discuss post-catastrophe contingencies. What exactly that meant was never clarified, but documents uncovered decades later in the Vatican's diplomatic archives revealed coded messages between the Secretariat of State and unnamed European bishops, dated just days after the Cuban Missile Crisis. One line, oddly phrased, stood out: "If the flames are drawn to Rome, follow the Black Folder Protocol. Only Petrine continuity must remain." What is the Black Folder? Was it a reference to succession, or something more esoteric? Some scholars interpret Petrine continuity as the preservation of apostolic succession, the spiritual line from St. Peter to the reigning pope. In practical terms, that might mean establishing an unbroken papal lineage, even in exile. This aligns with the Church's long-standing belief that the Pope is not merely Bishop of Rome, but a global shepherd whose authority transcends location. But others suspect the Vatican's doomsday plans go beyond mere succession. Throughout history, the Church has been the keeper of not just souls, but knowledge, sacred texts, forgotten languages, artifacts. Could a catastrophic event jeopardize not only human life, but humanity's memory? Was the Vatican's true concern not simply survival, but preservation? One account, though never officially confirmed, claims that during the height of Cold War tensions, certain manuscripts were quietly relocated from the Vatican Library to an undisclosed monastery in the Pyrenees. Among them were said to be fragments of the original Gospel of Thomas, ancient Babylonian astrological charts, and a medieval map of Jerusalem containing unknown geometries. Another rumor holds that the Holy See invested in a reinforced satellite communication system, independent of Italian infrastructure, capable of reaching trusted bishops in remote regions in the event of total global blackout. More intriguingly, a former Jesuit priest once claimed in a taped interview that a vault exists beneath Castel Gandolfo, once the Pope's summer residence, where instructions are kept for a reconstruction of the church following an extinction-level event. He described the contents only as spiritual, practical, and metaphysical. Shortly after the tape surfaced, the priest publicly recanted, then vanished from public life. Could the Vatican's doomsday plans also involve prophecy? There is the matter of the so-called Third Secret of Fatima. When the Vatican finally released the secret in 2000, it described a vision of a bishop in white, assumed to be the Pope, killed among the ruins of a destroyed city. But many theologians and researchers remain unconvinced that the entire message was revealed. Even Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, once hinted that the message contained symbols difficult to interpret and deeply tied to the future of the Church. Could the missing portion of that prophecy relate to the Vatican's end-of-days strategy? Then there are the archives, the vast sealed Vatican Apostolic Archives, formerly known as the Secret Archives. Stretching over 50 miles of shelving, much remains inaccessible to researchers. Some of the oldest records date back over 1,000 years. Scholars have long speculated that among these hidden documents lie contingency plans written during past apocalyptic fears: the Black Death, the fall of Constantinople, or the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. Did these fears form the blueprint for a modern doomsday protocol? And if so, who would be responsible for executing it? Some speculate about a select group of clergy, sworn to secrecy, trained not in pastoral care but in crisis management. A silent council, as one fringe theory calls it, operating in the background of the Curia, activated only under extreme global threat. Their role? To secure sacred artifacts, to disseminate encoded spiritual messages, to select and guide a successor, to become the invisible thread connecting the old world to the new. No proof exists for this theory. And yet, absence of proof in Vatican affairs is not proof of absence. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI shocked the world by announcing his resignation, an event unprecedented in centuries. Some observers noted the date, February 11th, the anniversary of the Vatican's founding as an independent state. Others pointed to the strange lightning strike that hit St. Peter's Basilica on the day of his announcement. Symbolism? Coincidence? Or a subtle invocation of deeper, hidden forces at work? As the world faces new global crises, from climate disasters and pandemics to renewed nuclear threats, the question arises once again: what preparations, if any, has the Vatican made for humanity's darkest hour? And perhaps more importantly, who would they choose to save? Are the Vatican's doomsday plans merely folklore and overinterpretation? Or are they a solemn, centuries-old responsibility known only to a chosen few? If the walls of the Apostolic Palace could speak, what truths might they reveal? And when the end finally comes, will it be the Church that lights the way forward? Or will it retreat once more into silence?